Chapter 922. Even when comparing photos, other people were not as deeply affected as Poplar Fruit. This was the first time he had visited the Xiong family after half a year, and he could see that the village's mental state had undergone a fundamental change. This was especially true for the children. When they first arrived, their eyes were sluggish, and they were curious when they saw strangers. However, most of them were afraid. Furthermore, he could feel a sense of confusion from them that permeated the entire village. This was a result of their lack of understanding of the people and matters outside of the mountain, their lack of planning for their own lives, and even their ignorance of the entire world. Now, the children's eyes had become lively, and their speech had become more orderly. Furthermore, there was a flourishing vitality in their bodies. It was as if they had been separated from the rest of the world. Poplar Fruit felt that if they were allowed to leave the mountains and communicate with the children in the city, there shouldn't be too much of a gap between them. This was what Yang Guo wanted to see, as well as the best answer to the concerns of the members of the New Dimension Society during their discussion. Poplar Fruit believed that after half a year of distance education, these children would be able to be reborn and integrate into the rhythm of modern society. Naturally, their shabby clothes and lack of food would not change. However, they would have a better future than before, wouldn't they? When they arrived at the Xiong family village, the children from the other villages rushed over to meet with the teachers. Poplar Fruit chatted with the children for a while, before leaving the scene to Lin Xingshan and the rest. Early the next morning, Poplar Fruit and Xiong Jiwu went down the mountain and met up with Meng Ping to inspect the other poor villages in Litong County. Poplar Fruit was already a millionaire with a net worth of tens of millions, yet he still had to personally work for these poor villages. Meng Ping was the #1 person in charge of Litong County's education bureau, yet didn't he also use his feet to measure the size of these poor villages? Currently, the New Dimension Society and the Distance Education Charity Fund were still lacking in manpower. The expansion and institutionalization that Poplar Fruit and Wang Yubor had discussed still needed time to be perfected. Therefore, they still needed Poplar Fruit's help. Of course, Poplar Fruit was also willing to contribute. He understood that every step he took now meant one less detour for the thousands of poor students in Lidong County who could not afford to go to school. Fong Beibei and Kiki stayed in Xiong village. It was too tiring for them to go up and down the mountain. The two of them could not be compared to Poplar Fruit's physique. If they followed them, they would only become a burden for Poplar Fruit. Kiki had a lot of fun with her brothers and sisters in the village. They played games and told stories. Kiki became the center of attention for the children. This was especially so when she climbed onto a chair and imitated her father's speech. She stuttered and babbled as she recounted her experiences with her father in Ba Li. Her dancing appearance was extremely cute. Kiki learned how to walk like a cat with Daddy. Daddy said that Kiki is very good. Kiki swayed her little but as she spoke. Also, there are very beautiful clothes. Daddy said that it was a wolf, but Kiki said that it wasn't. It was a fierce dog. However, Kiki likes gold more. Gold looks better than it. Although the little fellow spoke incoherently, and she did not know how to logically arrange things in order, the children listened attentively, as if they were listening to a very interesting story. Perhaps this was a joy that only children could experience, right? Lin Xingshan and Fong Beibei were listening happily, but this was only because Kiki and the children's expressions were funny. They did not seriously listen to what Kiki said. Lin Xingshan and Fong Beibei had done a lot of homework before they came. They prepared a lot of games, such as sandbag throwing, eagle catching chicken, and so on. Although these games were not played by the children in the city, they were still classics. In an environment without equipment and tools, they still brought a lot of fun to the children. It was also because of these games that there was a kind of lively atmosphere in the cold mountain. The children were noisy and even sweating from the hot weather. In the past, such a lively scene would only occur during the spring festival, when the men in the stockade who went to work in the city came back. The elderly, women, and children would go out to welcome them. Every family would light up the lanterns to burn firewood and sharpen their knives to kill pigs and sheep. Poplar Fruit came back 3 days later. During this period, Fong Beibei took care of Kiki. Of course, Lin Xingshan also came to help. However, with Feng Beibei around, Kiki did not make a big fuss because she could not see her father. In other words, the little brat was so heartless that she did not think of her father at all. The next night after Poplar Fruit went down the mountain, Feng Beibei boiled water in the woodshed downstairs after dinner. Kiki held a small sweet potato that was still a little warm and sat on a small wooden stool to watch it. Feng Beibei moved her and the small wooden stool far away from the dangerous area. Your father took us to the mountain and then left us in the mountain, Feng Beibei deliberately said with some sadness. Kiki, don't you miss your father these 2 days? Kiki misses Papa. Kiki seemed to be a little absent-minded as she replied. I don't believe it. How much does Kiki miss him? Feng Beibei shook her head and continued to ask with a smile. Very, very much. Kiki finally came back to her senses. She handed the sweet potato to Sister Beibei, opened her arms, and said with a huff, I do miss him. She seemed to be expressing her longing for her father, as deep as the sea of stars. Feng Beibei suddenly laughed. She wanted to tease the little brat. Unexpectedly, there was a call from outside. Kiki, Kiki, quickly come and see. It was Xiong Xiaofeng's voice. His voice sounded very excited. Danu dug up a cicada. It was probably a cicada larva hidden under the frozen ground in winter. It was not some novel animal. If it was Lin Xingshan, he would still keep a respectful distance from it. Only these simple children would want to show it to everyone as if it was a treasure. Hey, Kiki, Kiki is here. Hearing brother Xiong Xiaofeng's call, Kiki immediately became excited. She did not even look at the sweet potato that was just handed to Sister Beibei. She happily stood up and ran outside. Feng Beibei ran 2 steps after her. Fortunately, Kiki did not bump into the door sill. Only then did she feel relieved. Feng Beibei shook her head and muttered in amusement and anger, You still say you miss your father. You're just like your father. Once there's something you like, you'll become heartless. Fortunately, this situation did not last for too long. The next night, when Kiki fell asleep, mainly because she was tired from playing during the day, Poplar Fruit pushed open the door and appeared in front of Feng Beibei. Achoo! What greeted him was Feng Beibei's muffled sneeze and her pitiful eyes. Uncle, I'm sick. Feng Beibei wrapped the blanket around her body and leaned against the edge of the bed sickly. Chapter 923. As the saying goes, you reap what you sow. Feng Beibei's father, who used to be a primary school math teacher, stood to the side with his hands clasped behind his back. He was politely talking to young Guo, who was digging with her but in the dirt. At this time, Feng Beibei's somewhat dry voice came from the small box that young Guo had stuffed into the back pocket of her jeans. Ahem, uncle, I want to drink water. Right away, right away. This was the baby listening device that Poplar Fruit bought when Kiki was just born. It could only transmit sound in one direction, so Poplar Fruit shouted very loudly. He wanted Feng Beibei to hear him upstairs. Poplar Fruit turned to look at Father Fang. He held the shovel with one hand and scratched his head with the other. Go, go. I know you're not there in person, go. Father Fang waved his hand and said. After receiving permission, Poplar Fruit smiled and ran into the house. At this time, Mother Fang was carrying Kiki and holding the cantaloupe that made Kiki drool. The two almost bumped into each other. Beibei wants to drink water. Poplar Fruit bowed embarrassedly and then rushed into the house. Mother Fang pursed her lips and looked at Poplar Fruit's back. She patted Kiki's back and said with a smile, don't rush, eat slowly. Don't be as impatient as your unreliable father. She walked to the stone chair in the yard and sat down. She said to Father Fang, look at him, he can't do great things with his personality. He's not calm, he's reckless. I don't know what makes your daughter so loyal to him. Okay, don't be sarcastic here. Let me tell you, for your daughter to find a man who loves her so much, you should thank Buddha. Father Fang actually spoke up for Poplar Fruit. Then isn't Beibei's illness caused by him? Where could he have gone? Why did he have to bring her to that remote and desolate place in Guishan province? The weather is so cold. Aren't you looking for trouble by running up the mountain? Mother Fang muttered. As her father's most loyal little guard, Kiki didn't make a sound at this moment. She focused on using her cute little front teeth to nibble on the cantaloupe in her grandmother's hand. It was so delicious. It had been 3 days since Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei had returned from Xiong village. Originally, they did not intend to stay on the mountain for too long. Poplar Fruit would return from his inspection, and Fong Beibei's cold had prompted them to choose not to stay on. Kiki was naturally reluctant to let her go. However, it seemed that she was affected by Fong Beibei. She caught a little cold when she went down the mountain, and it became more serious on the way back. She had to take care of the 2 sick people on the way back. Poplar Fruit and Wang Yubo took turns to drive back to Yangcheng. His inspection in Lidong County and Mengping was not optimistic. Among the poor children, there were close to 200 of them who lived in worse conditions than the children in Xiong village. Not only were these villages located deep in the mountains, it was difficult to travel. The infrastructure there was a complete mess. Not to mention the internet, even the basic electricity couldn't meet the needs of large appliances. Even if Poplar Fruit wanted to help them, he was powerless. The other children were still fine. Most of them lived in mountain villages that were slightly closer to the county. There were 1 or 2 villages that were bigger than Xiong village, but the standards of the teachers there were too low. Not to mention the children in the city and the distance education, there was still a huge gap between them and the worst school in Lidong County for the children of the old textile factory workers. Apart from the close to 200 children, Poplar Fruit and Mengping had discussed a plan to expand the infrastructure after the Chinese New Year. They wanted to achieve universal distance education for all 4,000 children before the arrival of April. Naturally, the other 200 children were not abandoned. Poplar Fruit would continue to think of ways to help them. However, this required time and inspiration. Poplar Fruit, or rather, the New Translation Road and the Distance Education Charity Fund, had a heavy burden on their shoulders. On one hand, they had to send out a large number of people to help build modern educational facilities in the mountain villages. Although Fat Dragon and Cai Simin had quite a bit of experience, they still needed to recruit more people. With just the 2 of them, even if they worked themselves to death, they would not be able to complete such a difficult task before the arrival of April. On the other hand, Poplar Fruit and Wang Yubo had to continue expanding the volunteer teachers of the New Dimension Society. Last semester, they had recruited many people. At that time, they felt that the number was somewhat excessive. However, from the looks of it now, there were over 4,000 children. This wasn't something that a few dozen volunteer teachers could accomplish. After all, they weren't full-time teachers. After receiving Mengping's notification, Poplar Fruit had been constantly considering the future development of distance education. Don't look at how it was currently only in Litong County. Poplar Fruit believed that as long as their distance education maintained the right pace of development, there would be a day when it would spread throughout the entire country, or even the entire world. Poplar Fruit didn't dare to think about that. This way, the limitations of distance education would be revealed. It was a charitable act, which meant that the teaching staff would be mainly college volunteers. As for the college volunteers, regardless of how long it would take for them to become teachers, they wouldn't be able to spend all their time preparing lessons for the children. Therefore, they could only change their way of thinking. Poplar Fruit had always had an idea. It was similar to his extracurricular expansion. The students would be able to watch videos and learn by themselves. Naturally, the lessons wouldn't be self-learning. Poplar Fruit could get the student volunteers to teach the children. The videos for the lessons would be recorded beforehand, and would be no different from a normal lesson. However, the teachers who recorded the videos wouldn't have to face the children directly. Instead, the student volunteers would be the ones to face the children. They would control the progress of the videos and explain at any time to the children, answering any questions the children might have while watching the videos. Not only that, the children would be able to review the videos themselves after returning home. This way, the student volunteers would only need to be trained in the usage of the equipment before they could start teaching. To these college students, they wouldn't even need to review the primary school lessons and would be able to answer the children's questions. This was just a preliminary idea, and Poplar Fruit still needed to discuss it with Fat Dragon and the other members of the New Dimension Society before he could come up with an effective plan. This would have to wait until after the Chinese New Year, when everyone returned to Yangcheng. At this moment, he was worried about Fong Beibei's condition. After returning from the Xiong family, Fong Beibei's condition had been recurring. Although it wasn't a serious illness, it had lasted for 4 days, causing her to be listless. Even Kiki, who had the same cold as her, had recovered. With regards to Fong Beibei's condition, her parents were extremely dissatisfied. Furthermore, it was already the winter holidays, so Fong Beibei shouldn't be staying at home. Was it appropriate for her to continue living with Poplar Fruit near the school? Therefore, Fong Beibei was ordered to return home by her parents. However, the future son-in-law, Poplar Fruit, had also arrived. Father Fang prepared a house for him, and Poplar Fruit unabashedly moved in. Chapter 924. Just as Poplar Fruit threw out a question that shocked, embarrassed, nervous, and worried Fong Beibei, a group of people were sitting around the table in the conference room in Chengdu City, a place that Poplar Fruit had visited before. They were smoking and looking gloomy. Actually, it was not a matter of life and death. It was just that Mango TV had spent a huge sum of money to import a variety show. Where are we going, Dad? From Korean MBC TV station. They had to be extremely careful and not mess up the show, because if they messed it up, none of them would be able to escape being scolded for worshipping foreigners. The director had already been confirmed. It would be Xie Dekue, the great director who had been the producer of popular variety shows such as Sing If You Want and The Metamorphosis would be the director and producer. They had no choice but to give him the role. After all, he was the only director in the TV station who had a wealth of experience in outdoor reality shows. Director Xie had his own team. However, in such an important period of preparation for the show, there were still many leaders and important people in the TV station who joined in to provide suggestions and ideas. However, even so, Director Xie did not have much confidence in the show's viewership ratings and reputation. Firstly, the pace of this show is too slow. I've seen 1 or 2 episodes of the original show from Korean TV. The variety style is too intense. It's very difficult to show this in an outdoor reality show. Director Xie said. Secondly, the children participating are too young and naive. It's very difficult to create a strong conflict and dramatic plot like The Metamorphosis. However, many colleagues did not agree with what Director Xie said. Most of the female colleagues in his team expressed their love for the show. The loving or clumsy interaction between the father and the child is the main attraction of this show. Director Xie gradually understood the important factors that attracted the audience. Therefore, the selection of the Xing father and Xing baby was the most important step in the show's preparation. Director Xie even placed it first in the entire show's preparation sequence. It's all right. As long as you confirm who you want to invite, our station will do our best to invite them for you. In fact, even if I personally invite them, we won't refuse. Station head Lu knocked on the table and consoled. In the early stages of a program, before they made a name for themselves, it wasn't easy to invite a heavyweight guest. Moreover, a program like Where Are We Going, Dad, required adults to bring their children along to participate. This wasn't a joke. Celebrities would have many concerns. On one hand, they were worried about the safety of their children. On the other hand, they were worried about whether there would be any accidents on the program that would affect their children's and their own image. Reality TV shows needed to show their true selves. It was already hard to control, not to mention those ignorant children. The TV station gathered information on all the celebrities and their children in the country. They compiled it into a booklet and sent it to Director Xie for him to choose. Although it might be a little difficult for us to invite guests for our program, Fang Qiu said. Director Xie rubbed his chin and said with a frown, but when it comes to choosing children, it's better to have nothing than to have something substandard. Yes, first of all, he must have a good personality and be obedient. Someone suggested. No, that's not necessarily the case. Director Xie waved his hand and said, they can't all have the same personality. It's best if every child has their own personality. Only then can the conflict in the plot be reflected. Only then will it be interesting to watch. If they are all obedient children who are exactly the same, who would be willing to watch? Every child is an angel. There's no distinction between good and bad personalities, and there's no distinction between good and bad looks. Of course, their fathers are all celebrities, so they won't be too bad. Therefore, these aren't within the scope of our consideration, Director Xie said. However, I think we need to do some research on this age. Director Xie turned to look at Teacher He, who was sitting at the side. He Ling, I'm not targeting you. It's just that after watching the original Korean program, I feel that this is indeed a problem that needs to be thought about. Director Xie smiled apologetically and said, there's no problem with Poplar Fruit and his father that you recommended. Poplar Fruit has a certain level of influence and was also a popular figure last year. However, isn't his child a little too young? She is indeed young. Teacher He nodded and smiled. According to the information, she was born on April 28, 2011. She's not even 2 years old yet. However, Uncle Xie, if you watch the November episode of the Fast Forward, you'll fall in love with his daughter. She's really too cute. I won't deny that. Director Xie nodded and said, however, you have to understand that a reality show is different from a fast forward. It doesn't have a script. The child is too young, so it'll be difficult for her to cooperate with us to complete the mission. Perhaps I didn't think it through. Teacher He smiled and said, it's all right, Uncle Xie. Let's go with your plan. Teacher He did not expect Director Xie to definitely choose Poplar Fruit as a guest. He simply felt that Poplar Fruit and Kiki were very suitable for the show, so he recommended them. Regardless of whether they're suitable or not, even if they were invited, Poplar Fruit might not agree to participate. Teacher He secretly laughed in his heart. He remembered the scene when Poplar Fruit told him in a serious tone that he wanted to quit the modeling industry to focus on his studies. The two did not lose contact after the show. On the contrary, Teacher He and Poplar Fruit's relationship got better and better. They would talk on the phone from time to time and interact on Weibo. Teacher He even stood up for Poplar Fruit after he was maliciously hyped up by others. Poplar Fruit had invited Teacher He to visit several times, but Teacher He was never free. This time, Teacher He recommended Poplar Fruit on a whim. He did not even mention it to Poplar Fruit. In fact, he was very nervous. He was worried about how to persuade Poplar Fruit if he was chosen. Would Poplar Fruit be furious if he acted first and reported later? Just as Teacher His imagination was running wild, a director's eyes suddenly lit up. He said, speaking of Poplar Fruit, I thought of a model called Zhong Liang. He and his son might be suitable for the show. Zhong Liang was not famous in the entertainment industry, but he was famous in the modeling industry. He was the first Chinese model to appear in Milan Fashion Week. Before Poplar Fruit, he was one of the leading male models in the country. Previously, he had been compared to Poplar Fruit. However, compared to the sensation that Poplar Fruit caused overseas, Zhong Liang paled in comparison. How old is his son? Director Xie asked. Let me check. He has to be between 4 and 6 years old. Children around 7 or 8 years old tend to lose their childishness and children under 4 years old are too ignorant to complete the task, Director Xie concluded. Chapter 925. After hesitating for a long time, Fong Beibei bit her lower lip and asked Poplar Fruit, do you really want to go? Poplar Fruit also sat up cross-legged, and the two of them sat facing each other on the bed. He scratched his head and said, I didn't want to go so early, but didn't the news of our conflict appear on the internet from time to time? My mom was worried, so she kept asking me to bring someone back to see you no matter what. Then I thought that we are getting along quite well. Poplar Fruit pulled Fong Beibei's small hand that was holding the quilt and put it in his big palm. He smiled and said, although we haven't reached the stage of talking about marriage, we are all aiming to get married in the future, aren't we? It's not a bad thing to see each other's families, right? Sooner or later, we will have to see each other. I'm still at your house. Poplar Fruit laughed and said, weren't you chased out by your parents with a broom? Don't talk about my parents like that. Fong Beibei pinched the flesh in Poplar Fruit's palm and said angrily, I didn't say that I don't want to go, I'm just scared. What if your mom doesn't like me? Fong Beibei lowered her head and said in a voice as soft as a mosquito. Silly, why wouldn't she like you? Poplar Fruit laughed. You have a gentle, virtuous, kind, and cute personality, so you are the best candidate for a wife in her heart. Let me tell you, my mom raised my sister based on you, but unfortunately, my sister has a strong personality, so now she is the one who makes the decisions at home. Fat. Fong Beibei couldn't help but laugh. When she laughed, the corners of her mouth were slightly raised, which made Poplar Fruit's heart beat faster. He couldn't resist the love in his heart. He leaned forward and leaned his head slightly to the side. He stretched out his hands and pressed them on Fong Beibei's shoulders. Just as Fong Beibei raised her head, Poplar Fruit gently kissed the corner of her mouth without moving his tongue. It was just a gentle kiss. Fong Beibei was kissed by Poplar Fruit until her body went limp. Her arms hung down weakly, and she raised her head. Her eyes were blurred, and her hair fell down like a black waterfall. In the end, she was pressed down on the bed by Poplar Fruit. The two of them lay facing each other, gently feeling each other's breathing. Uncle. Fong Beibei said in a muffled voice, I still have a cold. I'm fine. It's best if you pass your cold to me, then you'll be healthy. Poplar Fruit smiled, his right hand gently stroking Fong Beibei's back through her soft long hair. I've decided. Fong Beibei's two hands grabbed Poplar Fruit's left hand, and said with a grin, I agree to go home with you. Really? Poplar Fruit was overjoyed. He pulled his girlfriend into his embrace and said with a smile, That's great. Don't be happy so early. Fong Beibei giggled. She patted Poplar Fruit's chest and said, If you want to bring me home, you have to convince my parents first. Poplar Fruit let out an ah sound, and then asked with a puzzled look, Isn't it just 998? Go to hell. Fong Beibei unhappily clenched her two small fists and punched Poplar Fruit's body. Ha ha, ha ha. Just when they were having a good time, Father Fang and Mother Fang below began to get restless, especially Mother Fang. This was especially true for Mother Fang. After Chichi finished eating the melon, she refused to curl up in her grandmother's arms. She struggled to get Mother Fang to release her so that she could study the little ants on the ground. Mother Fang then began to ramble on and on with Father Fang. Old Fang, why do you think this Poplar Fruit has been up there for so long and hasn't come down yet? After asking a few questions, Mother Fang saw that Father Fang was still digging around with his bag of melon seeds. She pushed his shovel and said, Hey, Old Fang, I'm talking to you. Are you listening? What? Father Fang finally reacted. He turned his head and asked unhappily. Mother Fang repeated her question. Hey, why are you always so worried? Didn't I just say it? Poplar Fruit, go up and give Beibei some water to drink. Father Fang waved his hand and said. Give her water to drink for more than an hour. In fact, less than half an hour had passed, but Mother Fang said impatiently, Is your daughter a human or a water buffalo? An hour. Father Fang was shocked and asked. He was busy with his melon planting just now. How could he have the time to calculate the time? Oh, you just found out. Mother Fang said disdainfully. You should just fall into this pit. Then why don't you ask him to come down? Father Fang said. You do it. Your daughter is the son-in-law you invited. Mother Fang said righteously. Father Fang was speechless. He squatted down again and said in a muffled voice, Forget it, young man. Give them more space. Don't disturb them all the time. Hey, you. Mother Fang was really angry with this old man. She waved her hand, shook her head and snorted. You only know how to be lazy. Okay, I'll ask him to come down. Poplar Fruit, come down and eat some melons. Mother Fang stood in the courtyard and shouted at Fong Beibei's window. Your mother is shouting. Poplar Fruit sat up and smiled at Fong Beibei. I'll go down with you. How can I get better if I'm always cooped up in the room? Fong Beibei also got up and said. Poplar Fruit handed her a pair of long johns and a down jacket. After Fong Beibei changed, the two of them went downstairs together. Mom, where's the melon? Fong Beibei held Poplar Fruit's hand and walked out of the door on the first floor. If you want to eat melon, cut it yourself. You haven't recovered from your cold, Why did you come down? Mother Fang said angrily when she saw the two of them snuggling up to each other. I'll go cut it. Poplar Fruit smiled and turned back into the house. Fong Beibei walked down the stairs and came to the courtyard. She smiled and blocked Kiki with her hand. I'm almost recovered from my cold, Fong Beibei said. Besides, I have to come out to breathe some fresh air. It's easier to recover, isn't it? Kiki, don't get too close to me. I'm afraid I'll catch a cold again. Ah, Sister Beibei, don't come over. Kiki had no intention of hugging Fong Beibei. She shouted anxiously, you'll step on it. Step on what? Fong Beibei squatted down curiously and looked at the cement ground in front of Kiki. It turned out to be a long line of ants. She didn't know what they were busy with. Humph. Mother Fang snorted and didn't say anything. Kiki, what are these ants doing? Fong Beibei touched Kiki's little head and helped her pull the scarf around her neck. Otherwise, the scarf would be stained with mud. Ants, they're moving. Kiki thought for a long time. Finally, she looked at Mother Fang and confirmed. They weren't moving. Mother Fang just casually said it. She didn't expect the little girl to believe it. Chapter 926. Originally, Mother Fang was the one who called Poplar Fruit down to eat the melons, but in the end, it was Poplar Fruit who went to cut the melons. After he brought them out, Mother Fang and Father Fang unceremoniously came up to eat the melons. Anyway, the whole yard was eating melons, not watermelons, but sweet and delicious cantaloupe. Other than Chichi had already eaten a large piece just now. Her stomach was full, and she had no desire to eat more. Ahem, Uncle, Auntie, Poplar Fruit finally couldn't help but say, there's something I want to discuss with you. What is it? Just say it. Father Fang spat out a melon seed and said, you're not an outsider now. Me. Mother Fang snorted coldly, expressing her dissatisfaction with Father Fang's last sentence, but she didn't say anything. Poplar Fruit scratched his head and braced himself to say, it's like this. This year, I want to bring Beibei home for the Chinese New Year. There was silence. Poplar Fruit realized that after he said that, the only sound left was the sound of breathing and Fong Beibei's occasional sniffling. Millimeter, and Kiki's squatting at the side, muttering something to a group of ants. What did you say? Mother Fang's gaze was like a knife, staring straight at Poplar Fruit as she asked. Poplar Fruit's forehead was dripping with sweat as he said, it's like this. But before Poplar Fruit could repeat himself, Mother Fang pressed on and asked, it's the Chinese New Year, and my daughter doesn't stay at home, but goes home with you to be bullied? If she's not bullied, why would she be bullied? Poplar Fruit waved his hand and quickly explained, my family is very nice, and they definitely like Beibei. With me around, I definitely won't let Beibei be bullied. But she still can't go home with you. How long have you been dating? Father Fang couldn't help but say. Although he liked Poplar Fruit, he knew nothing about Poplar Fruit's family. Dad, Poplar Fruit has already returned home to see you too. What's wrong with me going back to see his parents? Fong Beibei, who was squatting beside Kiki and pretending that nothing had happened, couldn't hold back anymore. She stood up and said, now that you've grown up, you don't want to go home anymore, do you? Mrs. Fang placed the cantaloupe in her hand on the table. Wiping her tears, she asked, for so many years, you've always spent the New Year at home. This year, you're going to leave your parents alone and ignore them. Although it was a reproach, Mother Fang's tone was sorrowful. Not only Fong Beibei, but even Poplar Fruit felt sad. Fang Zhengji's father sighed and turned his head to the other side. Fong Beibei walked to her mother's side and held her hand. She wanted to comfort her mother, but her eyes were red. She glanced at Poplar Fruit and didn't know what to say. Poplar Fruit realized that he had been a little thoughtless. The first time he brought Fong Beibei home, he had chosen to do it during the New Year. He hadn't considered Father and Mother Fang's feelings. Fong Beibei aside, even if Poplar Fruit didn't return home for the New Year and instead went to Father and Mother Fang's house to eat and drink, Xu Jinfeng would still flip out. Mom knows that you'll definitely get married in the future. When that time comes, you won't spend the New Year at home. If you give birth to a daughter, you'll definitely be alone for the New Year. But Mom and Dad feel bad. You're not even 20 yet, and you're already not accompanying me. I'm not mentally prepared yet, Mother Fang said sadly as she wiped her tears. Mom. Fong Beibei's tears turned into golden beans and fell down. She hugged her mother's arm and sobbed. She couldn't bear to part with her parents who had raised her for almost 20 years, but she just promised poplar fruit. She didn't know how to say it. Kiki heard the commotion and turned around. She got up from the ground. Because her clothes were bulging, she could only run over in small steps. She held Mother Fang's and Fong Beibei's hands and said in a baby voice, Grandma, Grandma, don't cry. Kiki is very obedient. Sister Beibei, Kiki is very obedient. Unexpectedly, Mother Fang pulled her into her arms and continued to wipe her tears. This sad mood almost infected Kiki. It was a pretty good thing. How did it turn out to be everyone's unhappiness? Seeing that the three of them were about to cry, Poplar Fruit walked over with the tissue box on the table and comforted, Auntie, don't cry. I'm just discussing with you. I didn't think it through. How about this, after the 3rd or 4th day of Chinese New Year, I'll come back to pick up Beibei and play with her for 2 days? Or let her stay at home to accompany you too during Chinese New Year? Hearing Poplar Fruit's words, Father Fang thought highly of Poplar Fruit. This child knew when to advance and when to retreat. He didn't pretend to be obedient or overbearing. Fong Beibei took out 2 pieces of tissue. Instead of wiping herself, she stuffed them into her mother's hands and said coquettishly, Yes, I'll stay at home to accompany you during Chinese New Year. I won't leave. Mom, don't cry. Mother Fang finally stopped crying. She sighed and couldn't help but mutter, If I don't leave now, won't I have to leave in the future? Grandma, don't cry. Kiki will help you wipe. Kiki pulled her hand out from Mother Fang's arms. Her chubby little hand gently stroked Mother Fang's face, just like how Poplar Fruit used to wipe her tears. Mother Fang's eyes were filled with tenderness. She hugged Kiki and kissed her. Then, she wiped her tears with a tissue and said, Grandma knows. Grandma, don't cry. Kiki, you're so obedient. This seemed to be the first time Mother Fang called herself Kiki's grandma in front of Poplar Fruit. In the past, she pretended to be reserved and cold. However, Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei didn't pay attention to this. Kiki went back to studying her little ant. Mother Fang finally sighed and said, Poplar Fruit. Yes, Auntie. Go ahead. Poplar Fruit stood to the side and waited. Come back to pick up Beibei on the 3rd day of the new year. But remember what you said. You can't let our Beibei suffer in your house. Mother Fang said. Of course not. Poplar Fruit promised. Don't just say it. Mother Fang said. You have to go back and talk to your family. If Beibei does something wrong, you have to forgive her. Our family's Beibei is kind-hearted. If he said something wrong, it might just be unintentional. You have to help say a few words. Poplar Fruit nodded repeatedly. He remembered Mother Fang's teachings. Mother Fang wanted to say something, but hesitated. After a moment of silence, she finally said, Let's see how Beibei is doing in your family. If he's doing well, let's arrange a time after the new year so that our families can meet. It wasn't just Poplar Fruit. Even Father Fang looked at Mother Fang in surprise. A few minutes ago, Mother Fang still didn't want to accept Poplar Fruit. Fong Beibei blushed. She hugged Mother Fang's hand and didn't say anything. Sensing the change in Mother Fang's attitude, Poplar Fruit was flattered. He nodded quickly. However, he was too happy. He scratched his head to hide the smile lines at the corners of his eyes. Chapter 927. Just as Poplar Fruit and Kiki went back to the teacher's apartment to pack their luggage and prepare to go back to their hometown, Zheng Yujie suddenly called. The timing was just right. Fong Beibei wasn't around, and Poplar Fruit hadn't returned to his hometown yet. In fact, after the airport, Poplar Fruit hadn't seen Zheng Yujie. After New Year's Day, when the Cine Road Company held its annual meeting, Poplar Fruit was at the scene. He was even pulled onto the stage by Zheng Yujie to make a New Year's outlook. Of course, after the annual meeting, Zheng Yujie had a bitter chat with him in the parking lot for a while. The content of the chat was needless to say, and everyone could guess it. This time, Zheng Yujie was silent for a while before she said, "I want to treat you to a meal." Listening to her tone, there was a high degree of hesitation, which made Poplar Fruit a little puzzled. One had to know that Zheng Yujie had always been straightforward. When had she ever hesitated to treat him to a meal? Could it be that she felt embarrassed because Fong Beibei was between them? Poplar Fruit sighed slightly in his heart. He was a little sad. He was touched by Zheng Yujie's deep affection and even infatuation, but he couldn't accept it. From the perspective of a good friend, seeing that Zheng Yujie was uncomfortable to treat him to a meal, Poplar Fruit couldn't help but soften his heart and say, "Okay, when and where? You can think about it again. If it's really inconvenient, you don't have to come." Zheng Yujie hesitated and said, "It's not inconvenient. It's just a meal with you. It's not a bad thing." Poplar Fruit laughed and said, "I will tell my girlfriend." Yes, now, whatever Poplar Fruit and Zheng Yujie did, he would tell Fong Beibei in advance. This wasn't asking for instructions, nor was it Fong Beibei forcing him to do so. Poplar Fruit just felt that instead of leaving things to be explained in the future, it was better to make things clear now to avoid misunderstanding and making his girlfriend unhappy in the future. However, with Poplar Fruit's EQ, he wouldn't discover his negligence. What happened now and in the future had eliminated the potential crisis, but what about the past? Zheng Yujie was silent for a while, then said inexplicably, "Okay, you chose to come." After that, she told Poplar Fruit the address and time, then hung up the phone. What did she mean? Poplar Fruit looked at his mobile phone. He was confused. Soon, Poplar Fruit understood what Zheng Yujie meant. When they arrived at the hotel room that Zheng Yujie mentioned, Poplar Fruit pushed the door open and let his father's little follower, Kiki, go in first. Then he looked up at Zheng Yujie and smiled. "Yujie, it's just two people, you." Yang Guo's words came to an abrupt end. He swallowed his complaints about Zheng Yujie asking for a first wife back into his stomach. He looked at the man beside Zheng Yujie, and his forehead was full of cold sweat. How could he not know him? In recent months, the man's photo often appeared in the local newspapers of Guangdong province. Even if Poplar Fruit didn't pay special attention to him, it was impossible for him not to recognize who he was. "Uncle. Uncle Zheng," Poplar Fruit said hesitantly. That's right, the man sitting beside Zheng Yujie was Zheng Yujie's father, Guangdong province's top leader, Zheng Mingsheng. Zheng Mingsheng was wearing a black Chinese tunic suit. He sat there drinking tea and reading the newspaper. He only looked up when Poplar Fruit called him. However, with just one look, Zheng Mingsheng's decades of official prestige made Poplar Fruit's heart skip a beat. Poplar Fruit was a master. Xiong Kehu's murderous aura couldn't even move Poplar Fruit's expression. Zheng Mingsheng had only been a high-ranking official for a few decades. How could he make Poplar Fruit so scared that he couldn't speak? Poplar Fruit didn't know why. He didn't do anything to the other party's daughter. Why was it that when he saw Zheng Mingsheng, he felt as guilty as when he saw Fong Beibei's parents? The atmosphere in the room seemed to have frozen. Poplar Fruit secretly glanced at Zheng Yujie, as if blaming Zheng Yujie for not saying it clearly. "I told you to reconsider," Zheng Yujie secretly mouthed and said silently. She was also helpless. Zheng Mingsheng suddenly made this request and wanted her to call Poplar Fruit in front of him. What could she do? Could she just say, "My dad is also here. It's better if you don't come"? What should she do? What else could she do? She had made the choice. Even if she had to kneel, she had to walk it. The only one who wasn't affected was the ignorant Kiki. After the little girl came in, because of the angle, she didn't see Zheng Yujie. She felt the warm air in the room, and then she saw that her father didn't move for half a year. Finally, Kiki couldn't take it anymore. She reached out and pulled at her father's trousers. Through the scarf, she said in a muffled voice, "Papa, Kiki is hot." Kiki's voice broke the frozen atmosphere in the room. Even Zheng Mingsheng put down the newspaper, pushed up the glasses on the bridge of his nose, and carefully looked at the little girl who was easy to ignore if she didn't make a sound. Poplar Fruit scratched his head. Although Zheng Mingsheng didn't say anything, he still squatted down and helped Kiki untie the scarf. He also put the cute little mittens on her small hands into his coat pocket. Even if the emperor came, Poplar Fruit would take good care of his daughter first. His daughter was the most important thing in the world. It's still hot. Because the down jacket was too fat, Kiki reached out with difficulty to reach her neck. She pulled the collar, exhaled, and said to her father. Poplar Fruit didn't take off Kiki's coat. He just helped her zip down to let her breathe. Sit down. In front of the child, Zheng Mingsheng didn't want to leave Poplar Fruit hanging. He pointed to the seat in front of him near the door, then turned to Zheng Yujie and said, Go and ask the waiter to add a seat for the child. No, I'll go, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Although Zheng Yujie had already pushed the chair away and stood up, Poplar Fruit went out to call the waiter first. Kiki raised her head, blinked her big eyes, and happily shook her two small arms and called, Auntie. The little girl liked to emphasize the I sound on the word auntie. It sounded cute. Zhang Yujie walked over and held Kiki's hand with a smile. Of course, she didn't pick up Kiki because she didn't want to irritate Zheng Mingsheng. Now Zheng Mingsheng was already frowning. After sitting down, Poplar Fruit thought it through. I didn't do anything wrong. Why are you so nervous? So he sat there and habitually washed his and Kiki's cups and chopsticks with hot water. He smiled when he should, and didn't mean to treat himself as an outsider. Zheng Yujie poured tea for Poplar Fruit and filled Zheng Mingsheng's cup, but this action made Zheng Mingsheng frown again. Although her status wasn't as noble as it was in ancient times, Zheng Yujie was still his daughter. What's more, shouldn't Yang Guo be the one pouring the tea for them first? Zheng Mingsheng chose to ignore Poplar Fruit's business at the moment. He also chose not to see that when Zheng Yujie poured tea for Poplar Fruit, he also stood up to take the teapot, but Zheng Yujie refused. You are Poplar Fruit. Zheng Mingsheng didn't drink the tea. He stared straight at Poplar Fruit and asked. Chapter 928. When Poplar Fruit hurriedly introduced himself, Zheng Mingsheng looked into Poplar Fruit's eyes and said, I've heard your name many, many times last year. Poplar Fruit was stunned for a moment, and began to ponder Zheng Mingsheng's intentions. If he had heard it many times, Poplar Fruit couldn't tell whether it was a compliment or a derogatory one. After all, Zheng Yujie and Li Zichao had broken off their engagement, and Poplar Fruit and Zheng Yujie's mother had a little conflict. Poplar Fruit believed that Zheng Mingsheng must have heard of his name at that time. However, in the past 3 or 4 months, Poplar Fruit's name had frequently appeared on the internet and in news reports. He had even led the headlines for a period of time. This might not be a big deal in Zheng Mingsheng's eyes, but it was a little bit of fame for Poplar Fruit. Then what was Zheng Mingsheng referring to? Uncle Zheng, please have some tea. Poplar Fruit didn't know how to answer for a moment, but it wouldn't be good if he didn't respond. He simply stood up and poured tea for Zheng Mingsheng. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit was very tall, and he could fall over the table from far away, so there was no need for him to run around. Zheng Mingsheng smiled slightly. He wasn't like Zheng Yujie's mother, who didn't give Poplar Fruit any face. As a person in a high position like him, he wouldn't get angry in front of others. He waited for Poplar Fruit to sit back down, and said, The education department put an award on my desk this year, and it's your name. It seems that it's fate, so I have to meet you personally and see what kind of person you are. Uncle Zheng, you're so busy with work, but you still have time to pay attention to Poplar Fruit. Here, I'll use tea as a substitute for wine to thank you. Poplar Fruit drank the tea in one gulp, then smiled and said, However, awards are just empty titles. It's best if I have them, but if I don't, I won't feel sorry. Don't worry. Poplar Fruit had just heard the slight threat in Zheng Mingsheng's tone. He took a step back in order to advance and made his attitude clear. You can do whatever you want. I don't care. Just like how Poplar Fruit always called Zheng Mingsheng Uncle Zheng instead of Secretary Zheng, he wanted to put Zheng Mingsheng in the position of his friend's father. As for the first leader of Guangdong province, it had nothing to do with him. Zheng Mingsheng was stunned. He was amused for a moment. He has some pride. What an interesting guy. He smiled indifferently and said, Although you don't care, there are always a lot of people who care, such as Shu Caijin of the education department and the leaders of your school who are helping you. Dad. Zheng Yujie said discontentedly, Why do you always put on airs when you invite Poplar Fruit out for dinner? Can't you talk nicely? It's almost the new year. If you're not happy, then let the ordinary people under your rule live happily, okay? Zheng Yujie was really hot-tempered. She didn't even give her father face when talking to him. Zheng Mingsheng's face became serious. He turned his head and reprimanded her. How many times have I told you? In the future, don't bring your spirit to me when you talk and do things. In the past, you were still young, so I didn't care about you. But now, you have to deal with all kinds of people when you open a company and a publishing house. How old do you want me to protect you? Will you never grow up? Zheng Yujie was scolded by her father, but her face was still full of smiles. She looked unmoved. In fact, this was her purpose. She wanted to divert her father's firepower and not let him put too much pressure on Poplar Fruit. And you, Poplar Fruit. Zheng Mingsheng pointed at Poplar Fruit, who was trembling with fear. However, when he saw my daughter, who was sitting next to Poplar Fruit and looking at him obediently, Zheng Mingsheng paused. His tone softened a little and said, "You and her are now partners. And good friends." Poplar Fruit added. Hearing Yang Guo's words, Zheng Mingsheng felt awkward. He pretended that he didn't hear anything and continued, "I hope that you can be a positive influence on her. You have a good personality, you're not arrogant or rash. But her temper is like a barrel of gunpowder, she'll explode at the slightest touch. If she doesn't change, I don't know how much trouble she'll cause and how many losses she'll suffer in the future. Do you understand what I mean?" He understood the reason, but how could a person's character be changed so easily? Poplar Fruit scratched his head and said to Zheng Mingsheng, "Uncle Zheng, don't worry. I'll talk to her." Poplar Fruit turned his head and looked at Zheng Yujie, who was holding her head high like a little swan. He explained, "Yujie, your father is doing this for your own good, right? If there's a problem, we can talk it out. Arguing won't solve the problem." Zheng Yujie glanced at him and said in a slightly relaxed tone, "Didn't I speak for you? I know. You're doing this for my own good. But that depends on the situation." Poplar Fruit laughed. "Your father didn't hit or scold me. We were still talking. It's fine, it's fine. You apologized to your father. After all, your tone just now was wrong, right?" Poplar Fruit persuaded. Zheng Yujie nodded and said to Zheng Mingsheng, "Dad, I'm sorry." Her eyes were smiling as if her trick had succeeded. In fact, Zheng Yujie's sudden attack was fake. She wanted to divert Zheng Mingsheng's anger. She was willing to apologize. Among those present, probably only Poplar Fruit and Kiki were in the dark. Who was Zheng Mingsheng? How could he be scared by Zheng Yujie? The reason why he played along was that he wanted to see how the relationship between Poplar Fruit and his daughter was. However, the conclusion didn't make him happy. Poplar Fruit's mind was relatively simple. He did treat Zheng Yujie as a good friend, but Zheng Yujie's performance was too spineless. Usually, she was so stubborn that she didn't even listen to him, her father. Now, she was like an obedient child, obedient to Poplar Fruit's words. Zheng Mingsheng was a little upset, but he didn't show it. At least, there was still a piece of good news, wasn't there? Yang Guo was just like how he was described on the internet. He was very devoted to his girlfriend and treated his daughter with respect. There wasn't much emotional interaction between the two of them. As for how to comfort Zheng Yujie and let her let go of this impossible love from the beginning, that was the Zheng family's own family business. For this reason, Zheng Mingsheng's attitude towards Poplar Fruit was slightly eased, and he didn't ask aggressive questions like at the beginning. Since they were here to eat, they naturally couldn't just chat. After the dishes were served, Zheng Mingsheng called Yang Guo and the others to eat. However, with Zheng Mingsheng, the big boss, Poplar Fruit ate a little unnaturally. Anyway, he couldn't taste the taste, so Poplar Fruit focused on feeding Kiki. Zheng Mingsheng ate a few mouthfuls, then put down his chopsticks and turned to ask Zheng Yujie, "How is your New Translation Road Publishing House now?" He was very interested in New Translation Road Publishing House. On the one hand, New Translation Road Publishing House was on the right path, spreading Chinese culture abroad. On the other hand, the name of the publishing house was given by him. Chapter 929. When he asked about her own publishing house, Zheng Yujie still had a lazy look on her face as she said, What about it? It's just SOSO, it's still passable. Poplar Fruit didn't know that Zheng Yujie's attitude was mainly because Zheng Mingsheng was too indifferent to Zheng Yujie in the past. Zheng Yujie had already been in Yangcheng for more than a month, but he didn't ask about the situation of her publishing house. There were some misunderstandings. Perhaps Zheng Mingsheng was too busy, or perhaps Zheng Mingsheng had learned about it from other sources. However, Zheng Yujie found it hard to accept this attitude of his. She felt that her father had left her to fend for herself and did not care about her small publishing house. Thus, Zheng Yujie's answer was just perfunctory. Poplar Fruit felt that this wasn't right. How could she speak to her elders like this? Uncle Zheng, it's like this. In 2012, our publishing house opened for 3 months, and the results were quite good. The book sales were as follows. Overall, the turnover exceeded 1 billion, and the profit of the publishing house was 42.6 million. And this is just the beginning. This year, we expect to launch. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Once he spoke, he started to talk endlessly. Zhang Mingsheng looked at Poplar Fruit strangely. He waved his hand and interrupted him. Why does it sound like you're doing a report? Did you make up all these numbers or something? This is our publishing house's year-end inventory report. Poplar Fruit, how did you memorize it? And you even read it to someone else? This is our publishing house's secret. Zhang Yujie felt that it was funny, so she purposely said with a straight face. Poplar Fruit laughed and said, I just listened to it once and memorized it. It's fine, Uncle Zheng isn't an outsider. After hearing our report, would he use it to do something bad? Zhang Yujie snorted and didn't continue to complain. Zhang Mingsheng had a higher opinion of Poplar Fruit. It wasn't because he was diligent, but because he was surprised by Poplar Fruit's memory. For a report like this, an ordinary person wouldn't be able to memorize it after listening to it once. Even if they were prepared and waited for him to ask about it, they wouldn't be able to recite it as smoothly as Poplar Fruit. You've made over 40 million in profits in just 3 months. Zheng Mingsheng asked in confusion. Is it really that profitable to do external book publishing? It wasn't that he didn't know about the book publishing industry. There were many companies with an average monthly profit of over 10 million, and there were even some that made over 1 billion. However, those were large book publishing companies. Zheng Mingsheng didn't understand how Zheng Yujie could earn such a high performance with a small publishing house with only a few people. Zheng Yujie didn't say anything. She gestured for Poplar Fruit to explain. Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly and explained to Zheng Mingsheng, actually, we hitched a ride on the Nobel Prize in Literature. With teacher Mo Yang's books alone, we've already released dozens of translations. Then, with Amazon, we've had good sales all over the world. Especially in December, after the award ceremony, the sales of these translations almost doubled. Compared to our main business, the sales of online novel translations are still much lower. Poplar Fruit said, however, we can't underestimate this. According to the data, the sales of our online novel translations have shown an exponential growth in the past 3 months. On average, each English translation brought us over 3 million last month. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Online novels? Zheng Mingsheng asked Poplar Fruit carefully about this non-traditional literature that didn't receive much attention. He sighed and said, so, you're focusing on online novels. However, I hope that you'll keep a close eye on it. Don't spread vulgar cultural content. It's better to have nothing than to have something substandard. Dad, what do you mean by vulgar? You don't know much about online novels, but you can't say that they're vulgar. Zheng Yujie couldn't help but refute. I think Uncle Zheng means that we shouldn't translate those works that involve pornography and have negative influences, right? Poplar Fruit quickly explained, Uncle Zheng didn't say that all online novels are vulgar. Zheng Mingsheng nodded approvingly and said, that's right. Although our country doesn't pay enough attention to online novels, if they're really as good as you say, one day, they'll get the recognition they deserve. The vulgar works that I'm talking about, whether it's traditional literature or non-traditional literature, exist. Every year, we'll deal with them fiercely because they affect the physical and mental health of young people. Similarly, if you translate these vulgar works, even if you earn enough attention with these gimmicks, it'll be ill-gotten gains. It'll also smear the image of our country, Zheng Mingsheng said seriously, so, when you're screening, you must keep a close eye on it. When we talk about Nihon country, is always an inescapable topic. Got it. We're not that stupid. Auntie Pang has already reviewed every work for us, Zhang Yujie said impatiently. In fact, she had already kept her father's words in her heart. She just didn't want to admit it. Papa, I want to eat shit. Kiki, who was eating beside them, suddenly raised her head, pulled her father's hand, and said. Poplar Fruit coughed awkwardly and said apologetically, I'm sorry, Kiki can't speak. Zheng Mingsheng waved his hand and said, children's words carry no harm. It's okay. You don't have to explain. Take her to the bathroom. After watching Poplar Fruit carry Kiki into the bathroom, Zheng Mingsheng picked up a cup of tea and was slightly lost in thought. He asked Zheng Yujie to call Poplar Fruit out. It could be said that it was a good thing, but also a pity. It was good that although his daughter was still infatuated with Poplar Fruit, he was not interested in her. This made Zheng Mingsheng feel a little relieved, and he was not afraid that the two of them would really come together. But there was also a pity. He liked Poplar Fruit from the bottom of his heart, mainly because of his talent, appearance, and simplicity. But so what? Not to mention that he had a child, his background was not compatible with the Zheng family. It was impossible to let him enter the Zheng family's door. However, if there were no emotional entanglements, in terms of career, he was indeed a very good helper for his daughter. Zheng Mingsheng had been busy establishing a foothold in the officialdom of Guangdong province for the past few months. Now, under the urging of his wife, he took the time to deal with the relationship between Zheng Yujie and Poplar Fruit. But now it seemed that there was no need to rush to make a move. Let's wait and see. Chapter 930. Meeting Zheng Mingsheng was just a small event in his life. It didn't affect Poplar Fruit much. Of course, to prevent his girlfriend from thinking too much, Poplar Fruit didn't mention Zheng Yujie's father to her. The next day, Poplar Fruit drove Kiki home. Fortunately, they returned home more than a week early. Poplar Fruit didn't catch the peak period of the spring festival. The traffic was smooth. After not returning home for half a year, the small village in his hometown had changed a lot. Because the Yang family's business was booming, it spurred the desire of the people in the village to get rich. Many people started businesses. Even if they didn't do business themselves, they worked in Poplar Fruit's factory. The treatment was much better than before. In November last year, Poplar Fruit donated a sum of money. In addition to the joint venture of the villagers, all the mud roads in the village were renovated. Every house had a hard cement road in front of it. The bad road conditions that were dusty on a sunny day and muddy on a rainy day were no longer found in the village. Poplar Fruit's family also bought a house next to it. They expanded the yard and renovated the small bungalow to make it more beautiful and comfortable. The reason why they expanded the yard was that in addition to Poplar Fruit's Land Rover and Yang Chengguan's Jeep, his father Yang Tai also changed his gun and drove a Volkswagen Passat. 2 of the 3 cars were muscle cars. The yard wasn't big enough to park all of them. Originally, Poplar Fruit wanted his father to drive a Mercedes-Benz or a BMW. But it couldn't be helped. The people from his father's era liked this brand of car. On the day that Poplar Fruit returned, Yang Ping and Yang Chengguan also went home to visit their brother. The 2 of them were now quite famous in this small county. Although they weren't ranked in the county and were at most considered township entrepreneurs, they were considered important because of their relationship with Secretary Chen Longjiang. Their family business was developing well. In addition to the shop at the station, they also opened a branch at the pier station. But in reality, the offline sales were just a drizzle. Their online store sales were booming, and they had even entered Tmall to promote their own island and Guangdong province specialty brands. In the second half of last year, our turnover exceeded 5 million, Yang Chengguan said to Poplar Fruit with a glowing face. Yang Gua nodded. He didn't know much about business, but he still gave his sister and brother-in-law a suggestion. Since we've already earned so much, we can consider stabilizing our scale first. Don't continue to expand our factory. If we expand too quickly, Our foundation won't be stable. It's possible that we'll collapse. That's what Secretary Chen said. Yang Ping said with a smile. Poplar fruit, don't worry. We know what to do. When Chen Longjiang was mentioned, Poplar fruit found out that he was also about to be promoted. There were rumors that Chen Longjiang would be promoted to deputy mayor of the neighboring city in March or April. Yang Chengguan told Poplar fruit. Secretary Chen didn't deny this statement. Ignoring the impact of Chen Longjiang's promotion on Yang Guo's family's business, Yang Guo felt that Chen Longjiang's promotion speed was quite astonishing, even though he had only been in her hometown for a few years. Although Chen Longjiang's own background had a great impact on his promotion was well-deserved. In the past few years, Poplar Fruit's small county town had undergone earth-shattering changes. Poplar Fruit decided to visit Chen Longjiang in 2 days. Although he was Chen Longjiang's benefactor, this debt of gratitude had been repaid long ago. However, Chen Longjiang was still so dedicated to his family. Poplar Fruit wouldn't be justified if he didn't visit to thank him and congratulate him. Don't talk about Secretary Chen. Talk about yourself. Yang Ping said with a smile. Didn't you say you were bringing your girlfriend home? Where's your girlfriend? My girlfriend is still at my girlfriend's mother's place. Poplar Fruit said with a mischievous smile. Okay. Poplar Fruit, after being away for a few years, you've learned how to play tricks with your sister, haven't you? Yang Ping rolled up her sleeves and was ready to torture Poplar Fruit. It's no use hiding it from us. We all know from the newspapers and TV that my daughter's friend is called Fong Beibei. What are you doing? Xu Jinfeng brought the 2 kids back. Qi and Yang Linjie were jumping around, chasing each other, and having a great time. Xu Jinfeng said to Yang Ping, your brother said that he would bring her back on the 3rd or 4th day of Chinese New Year. Her parents couldn't bear to let her go during Chinese New Year. I saw on the news that you met her parents. Yang Ping asked curiously. Poplar Fruit smiled and nodded. How was it? Did they agree to you 2 being together? Yang Ping asked. Is there a need to ask? If they didn't agree, how could he bring her back? Yang Chengguan pointed out his wife's logic error. As a result, she pinched his waist, causing him to grimace in pain. I'm asking, how's their attitude towards you? Yang Ping asked. Not bad. Poplar Fruit evaded the question and smiled. Before I came back, Beibei's mother said that after the Chinese New Year, we should arrange a time for the 2 families to sit down and talk. Wow. It seems that they're going to talk about marriage. Yang Ping exclaimed excitedly. Xu Jinfeng was also sitting by the side, listening with a smile. That's nothing. Yang Chengguan snorted and said, our Poplar Fruit is so outstanding. He's tall and handsome, talented and can make money. He's also such a big celebrity. Of course, her family would be nervous. Don't say that. Poplar Fruit shook his hand with a smile and said, Beibei's family is quite well off. They don't care about me. Most importantly, Beibei and I really want to be together. Yang Ping still wanted to say something, but she was quickly interrupted by Qi, who squeezed over. After returning to their hometown and the weather was not so cold, the little girl became very lively again. She threw herself into her father's arms and giggled, but tried hard to suppress her voice. Haha, Qi, what's wrong with you? Poplar Fruit smiled and touched Kiki's little head and asked. Qi is playing hide-and-seek with brother Jie. Qi lowered her voice, but everyone heard it clearly. Then why don't you go and hide? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. Qi wants to hide behind Papa. Qi giggled and was pulled by her father to the small gap behind Poplar Fruit's chair and squatted down. However, she was still worried and cried with a childish voice, Qi is hiding here. Don't tell brother Jie. Okay, we won't tell, Yang Ping said with a smile. After a while, Yang Linjie found them. He shook his head and looked around as he walked. Yang Linjie walked to the front of the adults, scratched his head and asked, Uncle, have you seen Qi? Poplar Fruit shook his head with a smile and said, No, I haven't seen her. He heard Qi's nervous breathing. Poplar Fruit had an idea and smiled wickedly. He gave Yang Linjie a thumbs up and then pointed behind him. Wow. Qi, you are here. I caught you. Young Linjie, who got the hint, jumped behind Poplar Fruit and said with a smile. Ah, ah, ah. Kiki screamed. Chapter 931. After returning home, Poplar Fruit spent most of his time with his parents. However, ever since he came back, the young family hadn't been peaceful. Except for a few families who were on bad terms with each other, almost everyone in the village came to Poplar Fruit's house to chat and watch Poplar Fruit. They didn't know the supermodels from Bali Fashion Week, but they knew the news. The news of Poplar Fruit receiving an award in Sweden with Mr. Mo Yang had been on TV for the last month. Everyone in the village knew that the young family had an amazing person. Kiki was the happiest one, because her friends often came to play with her and young Linjie. Playing hide-and-seek with two people was the most boring. It was more fun when there were many people playing together. Kiki didn't know the rules of hide-and-seek with many people. Kiki often exposed her whereabouts because her grandmother was guarding nearby. However, Kiki never realized the problem. She always played with her friends until she was too excited during the day and went to bed early at night. After visiting Chen Longjiang, Poplar Fruit began counting his fingers, waiting for the new year. After New Year's Eve, Poplar Fruit began counting his fingers again, waiting for the day when he could take his girlfriend home. On New Year's Eve, many villagers came to visit, but the young family was indeed much quieter. Young Ping and young Chongguan took young Linjie back to their hometown for the new year. Without young Linjie to play with, even Kiki couldn't bring herself to play. Although it was lively to pay respects to the ancestors and set off firecrackers, that wasn't what Kiki liked. Therefore, after dinner, the little girl asked her father to take a shower, then fell asleep while listening to a story. At that time, Poplar Fruit's busy life had just begun. He planned to watch the New Year's Eve with his parents, but he didn't stop receiving calls and texts. Therefore, he was sent to the dining room by Shu Jinfeng to return calls and texts. Don't make noise here. I'm watching a skit. If you can't even hear what others are saying, then what are you looking at? Most of the people who sent the messages to Yang Guo were either students from the school or from the training classes. Judging from the format of their messages, it was very likely that they were all sent to a group. 9 prefectures Fortune Tiger Raw, 8 directions Happy Travel, 7 colors Good Life, 6 straight wins in everything, 5 blessings Family Happiness, 4 seasons Peace, 3 stars Good Luck, 2 eyes reflecting auspicious clouds, a New Year's greeting, all good luck to you. Regarding these group messages, Yang Guo also composed a short message and sent it back to the group. Poplar Fruit was constantly interrupted by phone calls. Needless to say, Fong Beibei and Fong Beibei could talk for a day and a night on the phone. Fortunately, Fong Beibei knew that Poplar Fruit was busy at the moment, so she smiled and said Happy New Year to Poplar Fruit before letting him go. Just as he put down the phone, Che Enjuan called. This guy had taken on a popular series and could now be considered a second or third tier celebrity. However, he was a good person and didn't forget his original intentions. He kept in touch with Poplar Fruit, but he didn't come back for the new year. Beijing had almost become his new hometown. Poplar Fruit originally planned to call Big Brother He to wish him a happy new year, but he didn't expect that his calls would be so frequent. In the end, it was Big Brother He who called him. Hihi, Poplar Fruit, did you come home for the new year? If you're in Yangcheng, come over to Big Brother's place for dinner. He Wenjua's side was very noisy. It seemed that his sister-in-law Ji Xiaoyan and his son were watching the New Year's Eve. Big Brother, you're back? Poplar Fruit smiled and said, I'm at home. Or after the new year. Let's get together after the new year. I haven't seen you for half a year. Poplar Fruit knew that Big Brother He had been in another military area for the past 2 months, and he didn't go online. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let Poplar Fruit be bullied by others. Although, he couldn't do anything about those online ghostwriters. Poplar Fruit, remember to bring your girlfriend over for sister-in-law to check. Ji Xiaoyan snatched the phone and said to Poplar Fruit with a smile. No problem. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Kid, you should be doing well now. I heard from your sister-in-law that you've become a big star. He Wenjua took the phone and said to Poplar Fruit with a smile. How am I a big star? Poplar Fruit laughed and said, Big Brother, You know what kind of character I am. That's all because of other people's support, it doesn't count. I'm still a simple scholar. Not bad, not bad. That's how it should be, He Wonjua said with satisfaction. Don't worry. If someone bullies you in the future, you can come to our army. I'll see who dares to come to the army to deal with you. After chatting with his big brother for a while, Poplar Fruit hung up the phone. There was a long list of people on his New Year's greeting list. Zhang Yujie and Song Jiwen had already called in advance to wish them a new year during the day. Duan Xueqing had also picked up his phone, but Duan Xueqing was still cold and indifferent. Poplar Fruit wasn't sure if she had walked out of that shadow. His teachers, Chen Zhongdai, Mo Yang, Xiong Kahu, and Poplar Fruit had all called them to wish them a new year. Even Professor Luo Lin, who was both a teacher and a friend, and Poplar Fruit, who had helped him many times, had called to wish them a new year. Of course, Yarrow de Hua, who had helped Poplar Fruit a lot, was also on Poplar Fruit's list. However, because they often contacted each other, they didn't talk for too long. Uncle Jin, who had been helping with the evaluation of Poplar Fruit's awards, had also called Poplar Fruit to wish him a new year. Uncle Jin and Poplar Fruit were more like friends. He laughed and said, "You don't have to say thank you. When you have time, come back to the community and play a few games with me. That's enough." However, Uncle Jin had obviously underestimated Poplar Fruit. When Uncle Jin's kung fu hadn't been great, Poplar Fruit had been able to beat Uncle Jin without any resistance. How could Uncle Jin be a match for the current Poplar Fruit? What surprised Poplar Fruit was that when it was almost 10 o'clock, he received a call from a good friend that he hadn't contacted for a long time. Guan Yanjie. 2 years ago, when he was translating the biography of Steve Jobs, this guy was Poplar Fruit's right-hand man. Moreover, Poplar Fruit had a very good impression of him. However, after the translation, he said that he had to go back to Australia to study for a master's degree in management. After that, except for a few words on QQ, they had almost lost contact. This time, he could finally return to China for the new year. He took the initiative to call Poplar Fruit and congratulated Poplar Fruit on his brilliant achievements. No matter what, Poplar Fruit was still very happy to be able to contact an old friend. Guan Yanjie still had half a year to go before he graduated from the Australian University. He smiled and said to Poplar Fruit, "Captain, when I graduate, I'll come and join you. Don't mind me." How could Poplar Fruit dislike him? Regardless of how Guan Yanjie's management studies were, this guy's translation skills were still pretty good. Who knew, he might even become a member of Shindar Translation or New Translation Road Publishing House in the future. Compared to last year's New Year, Poplar Fruit had already improved quite a bit. At the very least, he had started to understand how to manage his own social network. It wasn't necessarily for the sake of using it in the future. Poplar Fruit wasn't that utilitarian, but he had already realized that the saying, "a true good friend doesn't need to keep in touch," was actually a ridiculous saying. Chapter 932. Sitting in the car, Fong Beibei was so nervous that her forehead was sweating, but she still pretended to be calm and asked, "Why didn't you bring Kiki here?" Poplar Fruit was driving. Thinking about how he had just snatched his girlfriend from Fang Qiu's parents, who were eyeing him covetously, and how Fang Qiu's parents wanted to swallow Poplar Fruit, he was still a little nervous. "It's a few hours' drive." Poplar Fruit laughed and said, "She's having a lot of fun at home, so I didn't take her back and forth." "You didn't have to pick me up." Fong Beibei's palms were sweating. She took 2 pieces of tissue to wipe them and said, "I can take the train there myself." Poplar Fruit turned to look at Fong Beibei and said with a smile, "How could I let you come here alone on your first visit? Even if we don't talk about face, how could I rest assured that you would take the train from thousands of miles away during the Spring Festival alone? Did your parents say anything when you came home?" Fong Beibei frowned and asked worriedly, "Will they have any opinions about me?" In the previous reports, Fang Beibei couldn't continue. She was referring to the time when she was deceived by Gan Juanji last year. Those reports had almost criticized her as a hypocritical and slutty woman. Even though almost 2 months had passed and Gan Juanji didn't have a good ending, Fang Beibei felt that God was watching her. But when Fang Beibei thought about it, she still felt uncomfortable and terrified. Skilled people were bold. Poplar Fruit's left hand was on the steering wheel, and his right hand was holding Fong Beibei's hand. He gently rubbed it and said with a smile, "Don't worry. I explained it to them a long time ago. It's not your fault. My parents are reasonable people. They have been looking forward to your visit for a long time. How could they not like you? Besides, I'm here, aren't I?" Poplar Fruit smiled warmly at her, then glanced at Fong Beibei's dress and said with a smile, "You're dressed so beautifully today. You have to be confident in yourself." Fong Beibei had specially dressed up today. She wore a floral print chiffon dress, which had a snow-white base and a lovely ink lotus print on the hem, which looked fresh and beautiful. She wanted to make herself look less student-like and more compatible with Poplar Fruit. She even wanted to put on makeup. Poplar Fruit naturally didn't want his girlfriend's smooth and delicate skin to be ruined by those cosmetics. He warned her that the cosmetics might backfire, and Fong Beibei then gave up the idea. People might think that wearing a dress in the winter was she too to look. It wouldn't be good if she caught a cold because she wanted to look good. Poplar Fruit didn't think much of it. First of all, Fong Beibei was wearing bottoms and a long windbreaker. Second of all, it was already February, and the winter in Nanguo wasn't too cold. Poplar Fruit's hometown was even warmer during the day. There was air conditioning at home at night. Xu Jinfeng had renovated Poplar Fruit's room like a new house. There were brand new appliances, and even the bed was exaggeratedly red. As for the journey, Poplar Fruit also turned on the heater in the car, so that Fong Beibei wouldn't catch a cold. Although Poplar Fruit left early in the morning, the journey took more than 10 hours. By the time he arrived home with Fong Beibei, it was already past 4 in the afternoon. However, the young family wasn't deserted at all. When Poplar Fruit drove the car to the door, he was shocked. Why are there so many people? The courtyard was crowded with people. Big aunts, second aunts, and little aunts were all here. Poplar Fruit saw his sister and brother-in-law greeting people. Even Fat Dragon, a relative, was happily squeezing his fat belly in the courtyard. Kiki, young Linjie, and a group of children were screaming as they shuttled through the crowd. Seeing Poplar Fruit's car, young Ping waved her hand and smiled. "Drive the car to Second Master's house, Poplar Fruit." Fong Beibei nervously turned to look at Poplar Fruit and said weakly, when had she ever seen such a scene? At first, she was so nervous just thinking about meeting Poplar Fruit's parents. Now, she actually had to face the scrutiny of so many relatives of Poplar Fruit. If they weren't already here, Fong Beibei would have run away in fear. "I didn't know there were so many people here." Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly and shook his head. He drove the car to Second Master's house next door and then went to Fong Beibei's side. He held Fong Beibei's hand and comforted her. "It's okay. Stay by my side. I'm here." Running away wouldn't solve the problem. Fong Beibei gathered her courage and got out of the car. "This is Beibei, right? She's so beautiful." Young Ping followed. She couldn't wait any longer. She smiled and looked at Fong Beibei. "This is my sister, my biological sister, Young Ping." Poplar Fruit smiled and introduced her to them. "You guys chat first. There's something in the trunk to take. Call me Sister Ping." Young Ping smiled. She could see Fong Beibei's shyness. She took the initiative to step forward and held Fong Beibei's hand. "We're in the countryside. The conditions here might not be as good as those in Yangcheng. Don't mind." No way, no way." Fong Beibei felt Young Ping's warmth and kindness. She felt a little relieved. She said, "Hello, Sister Ping. It's my first time here. If there's anything wrong, just tell me." "There's nothing wrong. Our whole family is very happy that you're here." Young Ping smiled. "Poplar Fruit rarely brings girls home. My mother is worried sick about him." In the trunk, Father Fang and Mother Fang put 2 jars of wild honey and a box of imported wine. The 5-bottle box of imported wine was worth more than 10,000 yuan. They felt that they shouldn't be too shabby since it was their first visit. They wanted to ask Fong Beibei to bring 2 more cartons of good cigarettes. However, Poplar Fruit persuaded them to go back with the reason that his father had just quit smoking. "Baby, you carry this. Poplar Fruit passed the beautifully packaged honey bag to Fong Beibei. Then, he carried the box of imported wine. Yang Ping smiled. She didn't even want to help. After all, it wasn't good to come empty-handed on their first visit. It was also because of this that Poplar Fruit passed the lighter bag to Fong Beibei. Otherwise, he could easily handle it alone. They're here. Fat Dragon stood at the door. When he saw Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei appear, he quickly shouted toward them. He was speaking the dialect of Poplar Fruit's hometown. Fong Beibei couldn't understand it. However, his shout was like poking a beehive. Everyone stood up and greeted them with smiles. Poplar Fruit's wine was taken by Yang Chongguan. He freed his hands and held Fong Beibei's waist with one hand to give her courage. His other hand was busy pointing at people and introducing them to Fong Beibei. Baby, this is my father, and this is my mother. Uncle, aunt. Fong Beibei blushed. She bowed and greeted Poplar Fruit's parents. Good, good. Xu Jinfeng's face was red. She held Fong Beibei's hands and couldn't help but say. Poplar Fruit could hear the surrounding relatives exclaiming in admiration, "This girl is beautiful. Poplar Fruit has good taste." Fortunately, everyone was speaking in a dialect. Otherwise, who knew how shy the little girl would be? Chapter 933. Look at the bride. Look at the bride. Childish shouts could be heard. The crowd was divided by a group of children. Yang Linjie, the devil, led a group of children and broke through the crowd, shouting and squeezing in. Kiki, who was here to join in the fun, also giggled and shouted with them. They lined up in a line, from tall to short. Kiki stood in the middle and put her hands on each other's shoulders. Oh, Sister Beibei. Kiki did not see it because there were adults in front of her. Now that she came in, she saw it and shouted excitedly. The little girl smiled so widely that her eyes turned into crescents. Ignoring Yang Linjie's exasperated yell of "pay attention to the formation," Chichi broke away from the group and pounced towards Fang Beibei. Looking at her overjoyed appearance, it was as if she was a child who had waited a long time for her mother to come home. Fong Beibei hugged the little girl in a hurry. Seeing the second acquaintance besides Poplar Fruit, Fong Beibei was also very happy. When she picked up Kiki, she did not notice that the little girl's shoes almost stepped on her white dress. Poplar Fruit quickly held Kiki's feet and took off her shoes, but it was too late. Although she did not step on Kiki's feet, she still drew a grey mark. Moreover, even if Kiki took off her shoes, her little feet were still black. Poplar Fruit did not think of this, so Kiki stepped on Fong Beibei's dress again, the 5 black spots. It was cute, but the dress that Fang Beibei had carefully picked out had become dirty. Poplar Fruit tried to pat Fong Beibei, but he could not pat it with his hand. Oh, oh. Papa grabbed Kiki's feet. Kiki twisted her feet and complained to Fong Beibei. It's itchy. It's okay. Fong Beibei whispered to Poplar Fruit, you can wash it later. Fong Beibei whispered to Poplar Fruit. Others did not hear it, but Xu Jinfeng, who was standing in front of them, heard it clearly. In addition, Kiki did not hide her joy when she saw Fong Beibei, so Xu Jinfeng was very satisfied with Fong Beibei in her heart. At least, this child has a good heart. Although she is very beautiful, she is not pretentious. She treats Kiki sincerely. Kiki did not stick to Fong Beibei. After she returned to her hometown, she could not sit still. Under the call of her friends, Kiki struggled to sit down, let her father put on her small shoes, and ran to play happily. Fong Beibei continued to follow Poplar Fruit to greet all the relatives and neighbors in the yard one by one. There were too many people, and even Fong Beibei, who was very smart, was confused. In the end, she could only stand beside Poplar Fruit and say shyly, hello. She could not remember who was who at all. Poplar Fruit felt that his girlfriend was tired, so he sped up. Finally, after meeting all the relatives, Poplar Fruit took his girlfriend into the house to rest. He brought Fong Beibei back to meet his family, not to let her be surrounded by people like a panda. After saying goodbye to his mother, Poplar Fruit took Fong Beibei upstairs to their room. Don't be so formal. Treat this as our home, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. He pulled Fong Beibei, who did not know what to do, to sit down on the bed. And this is my room. Why are you being so formal with me? Fong Beibei blushed and said, I saw too many people just now. I can't remember their names. My head is dizzy. Poplar Fruit also sat down beside her, holding Fong Beibei's shoulder. His left hand gently brushed her sweat-dampened bangs on her forehead, and said with concern, I didn't expect so many people to come today. I guess my mother's big mouth spread the news everywhere. Don't talk about Auntie like that, Fong Beibei said. Haha. Poplar Fruit laughed and said, I think you can call them Mom and Dad. You don't have to be so distant. Maybe you'll be happier if you call them Mom and Dad. Fong Beibei pushed Poplar Fruit, glanced at him gently, and said angrily, How can you say Mom and Dad when you come to the door? I haven't married you yet. And I don't see you call me Mom and Dad like that. Poplar Fruit said with a smile, If I dare to call you that, your parents will kill me. Looking at the tiredness in Fong Beibei's eyes, Poplar Fruit hugged Fong Beibei and let her lie down with her head on his lap. He stretched out his hands to her temples and said with a smile, Take a rest. I'll give you a massage. Fong Beibei obediently closed her eyes. Poplar Fruit's massage was very good. She felt that her temples were warm and very comfortable. She suddenly opened her eyes and sat up. She asked Poplar Fruit nervously, Uncle, how was my performance just now? Was I too nervous? There were so many questions that I didn't answer Auntie's questions. Will this leave a bad impression on your mom? Fong Beibei was anxious and flustered. Looking at her expression, she was about to cry. Poplar Fruit smiled and rubbed her head, saying, Don't worry, you did very well. According to my understanding of my mom, she couldn't wait to like you. How could she have a bad impression of you? Really? Fong Beibei asked happily. Really? Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Do you remember that in the middle, she rushed everyone and said, Okay, don't crowd around, don't scare the girl? Fong Beibei thought for a moment, then shook her head in confusion. I forgot, you don't understand our dialect. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, But, at that time, she did say that. If my mom didn't like you, why would she care so much about you? Fong Beibei was happy for a while, and her mental state was much better. She pulled Poplar Fruit's arm and asked, Should we go down? It's not good to keep hiding up there. Also, we should help Auntie work. You haven't even married into the family and you're already so active. Poplar Fruit pinched Fong Beibei's nose and joked. Isn't it good to be more active? Fong Beibei pouted and asked. Good. Of course it's good. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, But, you don't have to work hard today. Didn't you see that even I, the chef, don't have to work? Don't worry, it's my sister who's cooking. Then we should also go down. The guests are downstairs. Fong Beibei stood up, pulled Poplar Fruit's arm and said, Don't you want to rest? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. No need. Fong Beibei shook her head and said, I'm not tired. Okay. Poplar Fruit stood up, interlocked fingers with Fong Beibei, and went downstairs. Uncle, you have to teach me your dialect. Fong Beibei said, I don't understand what you're talking about. Learn. It's not easy for you. Or do you want me to translate for you? Are you going to question the ability of a professional translator? Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Fong Beibei had such a hard time learning English, it can be seen how bad her language talent was. No, I want to learn. Fong Beibei shook Poplar Fruit's arm, and said with a firm tone. Chapter 934. After a lively night, the relatives left one after another. However, almost everyone praised Fong Beibei when they left. Even the old and inarticulate great-grandmother gave Fong Beibei a thumbs up. The smile on Xu Jinfeng's face did not stop for the whole night. She was different from the silent Yang Tai. She paid attention to Fong Beibei's every move the whole night. Whether it was when they were chatting, Fong Beibei's bashful sitting posture, generous answers, and occasionally getting up to change the water to make tea, or when they were eating, she helped to carry the dishes, helped to move Yang Linjie's favorite dishes in front of him, and rushed to wash the dishes after dinner. Xu Jinfeng took in every little detail. From these little details, Xu Jinfeng could feel that Fang Beibei had a good upbringing and a virtuous personality. Not to mention her ability, such a girl was the best choice for her to choose a wife. Although Xu Jinfeng had been troubled by Poplar Fruit suddenly becoming an unmarried father, she had been worrying about how to find a woman who was willing to marry Poplar Fruit to settle down with Poplar Fruit. Her standards had long been lowered. However, how could she not have any expectations in her heart? She hoped that her son could find a suitable wife and not just make do. She's better than the girl who came to our house last time. Xu Jinfeng was very satisfied. She thought, although the one who came to our house last time was also very beautiful and easy to give birth to, her character was a little strong and her family background was much better. I'm afraid there will be conflicts in the future. This Feng Beibei is still better. She's gentle and obedient. Fat Dragon was also about to leave. He held his wife's hand and the two of them walked in front of Poplar Fruit. He winked and whispered to Poplar Fruit in his hometown dialect, "Poplar Fruit, not bad, not bad. I finally understand why you chose her in the end." Fat Dragon's words had a hidden meaning. More than half a year ago, he thought that Poplar Fruit and Zheng Yujie had an affair in Xiong village, but he did not like Zheng Yujie very much. He had no choice, she was too domineering towards him. As for Zheng Yujie, Fat Dragon felt that she was not a good match for Poplar Fruit. As for Feng Beibei, Fat Dragon also felt that she was not a good match for Poplar Fruit. After all, he was also a little affected by the public opinion on the internet. The saying 3 men make a tiger was not groundless. Later, he helped Poplar Fruit deal with Gan Juanji. Although Gan Juanji's death was unclear, Fat Dragon firmly believed that Poplar Fruit must have done something in the afternoon. In his heart, Fat Dragon always felt that Poplar Fruit was not worth the risk for such a woman, but now, it seemed that he was biased. The girl that Poplar Fruit chose was beautiful and virtuous, just like his wife. Fat Dragon was narcissistic. That was why the scene just now happened. Hee. Poplar Fruit was speechless. Fortunately, Feng Beibei did not understand. He waved his hand and drove Fat Dragon away. "Okay, you go back early. It's too late to drive. We'll contact each other later. We still have work after the new year." After Fat Dragon left, Feng Beibei asked Poplar Fruit like a curious baby, "Uncle, what did he say?" "Nothing, he just said that you are beautiful." Poplar Fruit laughed. "He has said this countless times today." Hee. Feng Beibei blushed and laughed. Finally, the guests left. Yang Ping and Yang Chongguan did not go back to the county that day. They stayed at home, but they also took Yang Linjie upstairs to take a shower. It was past 8 o'clock, which was not early in the countryside. Xu Jinfeng had just taken Kiki to take a shower. She just came out. She hugged Kiki and asked, "Little Fang, are you tired? The conditions in the countryside are tough, but the people are still very warm. Are you not used to it?" "No, Auntie." Feng Beibei bent down slightly and smiled. "I'm used to it. During the day, we cleaned up the room next to Poplar Fruit. There are no furniture, but there are air conditioners. Don't mind." Xu Jinfeng smiled. "Tomorrow, I will ask Poplar Fruit to go to the county to buy you a big TV. Oh, Poplar Fruit forgot to tell his mother about this. He smiled and said, "Mom, don't worry. She will sleep at my place tonight." Xu Jinfeng was stunned. She did not expect Poplar Fruit and Feng Beibei to progress so quickly. Didn't Poplar Fruit say that they had only been together for half a year? The older generation could not react. She looked at Feng Beibei. Feng Beibei's face was so red that even her ears were dyed red. She nodded embarrassedly and said, "Yes, but I still have to thank Auntie." This was a good thing. Unlike Father and Mother Fang's reaction, Xu Jinfeng's face was like a blooming flower. What was wrong with this? It was her son who took advantage of Feng Beibei's eldest daughter. Very good, very good. Xu Jinfeng was still thinking about whether she should say a few words to Poplar Fruit later and tell him to seize the opportunity and not let go of such a good girl. Now it seemed that she did not need to worry about it. Xu Jinfeng's heart was blooming with joy. Poplar Fruit rarely took the initiative, and he took down Feng Beibei's daughter so quickly. "Papa, hug." Kiki was a little sleepy. She rubbed her eyes and habitually stretched out her hands, wanting her father to hug her. It was more comfortable to sleep in her father's arms. Poplar Fruit waved his hand and said, "Dad hasn't taken a bath yet. He stinks. Kiki, let Grandma hug you." "Let me do it." Fong Beibei stretched out her hands. Although she had always wanted to help, Yang Ping had blocked her, so she was still clean. Being held in the arms of Sister Beibei, Kiki pouted, but she did not make a fuss. She turned her head and looked around the lobby on the first floor, and asked doubtfully, "Where is Brother Jie?" "Brother Jie went to sleep. He is also sleepy. You can find him tomorrow. Let's go upstairs." Poplar Fruit turned his head and said to his mother, "Mom, let's go upstairs." "Go upstairs and rest early," Xu Jinfeng said with a smile. Fong Beibei could feel that Poplar Fruit's mother was implying something, and she also wanted to know the reason. However, she could not explain it, so she had to secretly pinch Poplar Fruit's waist when they went upstairs. "What's wrong?" Poplar Fruit turned his head and asked in confusion. Back in the room, he put Kiki on the big bed and let her play by herself. Fong Beibei pouted and said, "Your mother misunderstood." "What misunderstanding?" Poplar Fruit winked and smiled, "It's okay. Anyway, it's not far away, right?" Fong Beibei blushed, turned her head, pretended to be cold and snorted, and said, "Not at all." Poplar Fruit moved closer, put his hands on Fong Beibei's waist, and gently stroked it up and down. Under the dress, Fong Beibei's waist was thin and soft like a water snake. He put his ear close to Fong Beibei's ear, and whispered softly, "Then, what if I can't hold it in anymore? Do you want to die?" Kiki is still awake. Fong Beibei's ears were red. She pressed down Poplar Fruit's hand that was slowly moving up, and slapped it. She turned around, bit her lower lip, looked up at Poplar Fruit, and said, "If you can't hold it in, go to the toilet and do it yourself." He tilde. Chapter 935. In Poplar Fruit's hometown, Poplar Fruit spent their first Valentine's Day together with her. Poplar Fruit brought Fong Beibei to his favorite cliff. The two of them didn't make solemn vows of love. They just hugged each other affectionately and looked at the sea for the whole morning. Although the winter sea breeze was still a little cold, Fang Beibei felt warm in Yangguo's arms with the wreath made of light yellow wildflowers. She wanted to stay like this forever. However, Fong Beibei couldn't stay at Poplar Fruit's house for a few more days. Poplar Fruit had to bring her back to school by the 7th day of the Chinese New Year. University started earlier. Fong Beibei still had to register. Unlike Poplar Fruit, she didn't have to follow the school's basic student management system. However, Poplar Fruit had to go back early. He had 2 public elective courses to open next semester. He had to go back and select the students. Moreover, he also wanted to summon Fat Dragon and Cai Simon and ask them to bring people to Lidong County to install remote education equipment for the children in 16 poor mountain villages. "Uncle, do you think I should choose your public elective course?" Fong Beibei stood behind Poplar Fruit. She crossed her arms and hugged Poplar Fruit's neck. She rubbed her head and asked with a smile. Poplar Fruit reached out and touched Fong Beibei's face. He smiled and said, "Why choose my course? You don't like linguistics." Fong Beibei pressed her body against Poplar Fruit's body. She pouted and asked in Poplar Fruit's ear, "Then why don't you give me a high score?" Poplar Fruit turned around and looked at her. He said snappily, "If I really did that, would you accept it?" "I don't want to." Fang Beibei immediately responded, "I want my real result." "That's it. You know it yourself. Why are you asking me?" Poplar Fruit smiled and waved his arm behind him. He patted her little butt and said, "Stop messing around. I just want to see if you have the heart," Fong Beibei said. She looked at Poplar Fruit's computer. Poplar Fruit brought the computer home so that he could work at home. However, what puzzled Fong Beibei was that Poplar Fruit wasn't translating. He was writing Chinese. It wasn't the prose, but it was a long thesis. "What are you writing?" "A thesis?" Fong Beibei asked curiously. Fong Beibei admired Poplar Fruit for a lot of things. One of them was his ability to write theses. Other people would be in so much pain when writing theses. But for Poplar Fruit, writing a thesis was like eating and drinking soup. As long as he had the inspiration, he could quickly write a thesis. Poplar Fruit's hands didn't stop. He was multitasking as he explained to Fong Beibei, "It's not a thesis. It's just a small part of a thesis that I've been researching recently." "Translation theory?" Fong Beibei asked curiously. "No, it's a new way to learn Chinese." Poplar Fruit smiled. "Isn't Chinese the hardest language to learn in the world? I'm thinking if I can find a common point or a new learning method to make Chinese as easy to learn as English." "Hey, you've finished researching translation theory?" Fong Beibei asked curiously. "Nope. How could I finish researching translation theory?" Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Any theory is just a framework. I can only say that I'm constantly filling in the content that I agree with. In the future, there will be more people and more theories that will be incorporated. This is different from mathematics, which is a subject that tends towards the truth." Fong Beibei nodded, not fully understanding. Wah. Just as Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei were talking upstairs, Kiki's cries came from downstairs. "What's wrong?" Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei quickly ran to the corridor and looked downstairs. They saw that Xu Jinfeng had already arrived and carried Kiki. But Kiki still didn't know why she was crying so hard. "Mom, what happened?" Poplar Fruit was anxious and didn't care that Fong Beibei didn't understand, so he asked in his hometown dialect. "Uncle, Kiki, she hit her head." Yang Linjie stood at the side, helpless. He could only look up and mumble to Poplar Fruit. "What's going on?" Fong Beibei didn't understand. She anxiously pulled Poplar Fruit's sleeve and pulled him downstairs as she asked. "She said she hit her head. It's probably a game of hide and seek." Kiki didn't look where she was going and hit her head. Poplar Fruit explained. He rushed to his mother's side. At this time, Kiki was still crying miserably. No matter how Xu Jinfeng coaxed her, her crying didn't ease up. "She hit here." Xu Jinfeng gestured. The windows in the village were relatively short. Kiki might have been talking to her brother while running. She didn't look where she was going and hit her head on the open window. Fortunately, she only hit the lower edge and not the sharp corner. Also, Kiki wasn't tall enough. She only hit her forehead and not her eyes or other parts of her body, but it was definitely not a light hit. Not to mention Xu Jinfeng, even if Poplar Fruit went down and took Kiki to comfort her, Kiki would still wail loudly. With the physical pain and mental shock, how could Kiki still listen to her father's comfort? Yang Linjie lowered his head and stood at the side. He also knew that he didn't take good care of his sister and was afraid of being scolded by the adults. However, at this time, Poplar Fruit and the others were all concerned about Kiki and didn't care about him. "Auntie, do you have Wanhua oil at home? Do you want me to go buy it?" Fong Beibei asked. After Poplar Fruit sat down with Kiki in his arms, Fong Beibei gently lifted Kiki's bangs to check. She saw that there was a big bump on her forehead. Yes. Xu Jinfeng went to the room and rummaged through it. She said, "This is better. Shou Jie used to hit his head a lot. It's very effective to apply this." She also handed over a big ball of cotton. Fong Beibei took it, but she didn't open it yet. She said, "Wait a moment. Kiki is still crying so hard. If I apply the medicine now, I'm afraid that her tears will go into her eyes." Since Kiki was born, she had been protected by her father. She had never encountered such a serious hit. Not to mention hitting her head, she even rarely encountered small injuries and pain. And this time, it could be said that Kiki had encountered the most serious injury since she was born. Even when she was robbed, with Poplar Fruit's body protecting her, she didn't suffer such a serious injury when she fell down from the car. Poplar Fruit could see that the big bump on her head had a purplish-green extravasated blood. At first, Poplar Fruit was also panicking, especially when Kiki was crying so heartbreakingly beside his ear. But slowly, Poplar Fruit found that Kiki didn't suffer any internal injury except for the extravasated blood. He came to his senses. "What are you doing? Why am I panicking? I have internal strength. I'm good at dispelling blood stasis and treating injuries." Poplar Fruit smiled, and his heart calmed down a lot. Xu Jinfeng, who was concerned about Kiki, noticed Poplar Fruit's smile. She immediately said angrily, "What are you laughing about as a father?" Your daughter hit her head. Is it very funny? Poplar Fruit was stunned for a moment. He quickly waved his hand and said, "No. I just feel that it's not a big deal. She's a child, so it's inevitable for her to bump into things." This wasn't unreasonable. After all, children who grew up in a greenhouse would easily be defeated by setbacks in the future. But, it's such a big bump. Fong Beibei pinched Poplar Fruit angrily and agreed with Xu Jinfeng. Auntie is right. You shouldn't be laughing. Your daughter is crying so hard. Can't you feel that it's very painful here? How could he explain? There was no way to explain. Facing the army of his mother and girlfriend, Poplar Fruit could only obediently admit his mistake. Chapter 936. After returning to Yang Cheng, the bump on Kiki's head gradually subsided under her father's care. However, the little girl seemed to have forgotten the pain after the scar healed. Within 2 days, she began to jump up and down and was as naughty as a boy. Time passed quickly and Poplar Fruit welcomed his first class of the semester. Although he kept telling himself not to be nervous and Poplar Fruit didn't show any signs of nervousness, Poplar Fruit still arrived at the classroom early. Today wasn't the first time Poplar Fruit had a class, but it was the first time Poplar Fruit had a formal class in his life. After all, in the past, he was either a substitute teacher, a cram school type of training, or a distance education class for children. Compared to today, not only did the entire class belong to him, but he also had a formal organization. The previous classes were a bit small. Yesterday, Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei went shopping for clothes. What kind of clothes Poplar Fruit wore for his first class was a big deal for the young couple. The Chinese tunic suit was too mature and didn't suit a 25-year-old young man like Poplar Fruit. A formal suit was too serious, and a casual one was too exaggerated. Or it could be said that if he dressed too handsome, it would distract the students. In the end, he simply learned from the young foreign professors and wore a simple collared t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. It looked young and energetic, but not too exaggerated. Moreover, when worn by the tall Poplar Fruit, it looked simple and fashionable. There were many people who wanted to choose Poplar Fruit's class. There were so many that Poplar Fruit couldn't believe his eyes. The medium-sized classroom was full of people. There were students sitting on the floor in the middle aisle. There were people in the open space at the back. There were also students peeking in from outside the door. It looked like the scale of 100 people was definitely over. Poplar Fruit estimated that 150 people wasn't impossible. And a lot of people meant that it was noisy, and difficult to control. Poplar Fruit picked up the microphone and tapped it lightly. His magnetic voice came out from the loudspeaker. "I'm a bit flattered." The students in the classroom started to respond with kind laughter. They gradually quieted down. They pricked up their ears and wanted to hear how Poplar Fruit would open the class. "I have 2 public elective classes this semester, Translation Theory and Practice and Basic Swedish. This is the first class of Translation Theory and Practice." Poplar Fruit smiled and gave a simple introduction. From the name, it's not an interesting class. Am I right? If it was when I was an undergraduate student, I wouldn't even be interested in choosing such a course. Yang Guo was like a peer, using an equal tone to chat with her classmates. Ha ha. The students below the stage laughed one after another. They really felt the same way. That's why I've been very nervous. I was worried that the classroom would be empty when I came in the morning. Poplar Fruit bowed to the students gratefully and said, "Now I have to thank all of you. Thank you for your support." Applause immediately sounded. This was the students' sincere response to Poplar Fruit. Several students shouted, "Poplar Fruit Senior, we're here for you." The reason why so many people came today was that the news of Poplar Fruit's class had already spread on the internet. Many of Poplar Fruit's hardcore fans were excited. They felt that this was a benefit given to them by the school. For the sake of Poplar Fruit, how could they not choose this class? As for the other students, some of them really liked translation, and some of them just wanted to join in the fun. I know. Before class started, a few students came up to me and asked for autographs and photos. Of course, I wouldn't refuse. Poplar Fruit nodded and said with a smile. The audience burst into laughter. The girls who had asked for autographs just now blushed and covered their mouths as they laughed. But there's a problem that I've emphasized many times. I'm not a star. I'm just an ordinary person who once had a little fame. And in the school, I'm just your senior, or a bit arrogant, your teacher for this class. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. The small commotion in the audience gradually subsided. They also felt that Poplar Fruit was beginning to be serious. Today is the first class, and also an opportunity for us to get to know each other. After today's class, everyone has a chance to make a new choice, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. There's no good or bad in public elective classes. It's only about whether it suits you or not. I hope that everyone can calmly analyze, put aside my personal factors, and see whether it suits you or not, and whether you like this class. Poplar Fruit looked a bit serious. If it's really not suitable, I also hope that everyone can make room for the students who really want to learn translation. Ahem. Realizing that he was too serious, Poplar Fruit suddenly laughed. I'm talking about making room. Of course, I don't mean to ask you to leave your seats, but I'm talking about the seats in the course selection system. My class allows you to sit in, so whether you choose to attend or not, you're welcome to come and listen if you have time or if you're interested. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. I'll treat formal and informal students the same. The only difference is that the students who choose to attend the class in the system have to follow the school's rules and my course requirements. What requirements? The students in the audience looked at Poplar Fruit in confusion. My course requirements are still very strict. Poplar Fruit pondered for a moment and said, whether it's the 40% average grade or the 60% final exam grade, it's not easy to get. If you're not really interested in the translation industry, you're not really invested in it, you'll be in danger of failing. Fail? Everyone began to look at Poplar Fruit with some trepidation. Even the girls who were laughing and chasing stars just now put away the smiles on their faces. After all, the students of Higoshiyama University had the most basic qualities of a student, and they still had a passionate pursuit of grades. Or I can give you a grading standard. Poplar Fruit wrote a row of words on the blackboard. There are 3 kinds of grades for the final exam, 30, 75, and 90 and above. It means that you didn't study hard, you studied hard but didn't learn well, and you'll be graded according to the final result. The students in the audience looked at Poplar Fruit dumbfoundedly. It was the first time they saw such a strange grading system. But Poplar Fruit's intention was also very obvious. He wouldn't mistreat students who studied hard, and he was even willing to let students who studied well get high marks. It seemed that this warm guy senior brother couldn't be fooled by a few soft girls acting coquettishly. From these words, he wasn't necessarily simpler than the legendary 4 famous supplements and Mihu Shatai. Chapter 937. At this moment, Poplar Fruit was completely different from the Poplar Fruit in everyone's imagination. Although he was still standing on the stage with a bright smile, everyone could not help but shudder. It was a bit like the fusion of ice and fire. It was not over yet. 10% attendance points, 10 points for perfect attendance, and 0 points for missing a class. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Don't underestimate my memory. I can completely remember the faces of all 60 students. I can tell at a glance if you are absent or if you are looking for someone to substitute for you. Poplar Fruit pointed at himself and said somewhat wittily. However, no one laughed. There is also 30% of homework points. Poplar Fruit said, since it is a translation practice class, homework is indispensable. Whether it is in class or after class, I hope that students who choose this class can take it seriously. Those who are not serious will get 0 points. Those who are serious will get at least 10 points, those who have made significant progress will get 20 points, and those who have done well will get more than 25 points. Poplar Fruit said. The usual points also highlighted Poplar Fruit's clear grading standards. Does everyone find it difficult? Poplar Fruit finally stopped his cold data explanation. He paused and looked at the students below the stage. Many people nodded silently, making little noise. It seemed that they were all frightened by Poplar Fruit. This was normal. Poplar Fruit was a very professional course. Students who chose this course came from different departments, especially science students who chose Poplar Fruit's class. It was relatively difficult for science students to perform well in such a course. Actually, it's not that bad. Poplar Fruit shook his head and said, I am not strict with you. Unless you don't come to class or treat the course carelessly, you will generally not be in danger of failing the course. As long as you take it seriously, even if you do badly, you can get at least 65 points. Poplar Fruit said, as for those students who did well, I mean those above average, their scores started from 89. Wow. The students below the stage began to react. Didn't that mean that there were around 30 people who could get 89 points? 89 points was already very high. And this was above average. When I said average, I was talking about everyone, not the number of people. Poplar Fruit corrected the students' misconceptions. I can give you a not-so-accurate reference standard. Everyone should be at least Level 8 professional translators. The audience was silent. Level 8 specialized ESPA, what an unattainable goal. Even for an English major, there was no guarantee that they could pass the Level 8 exam. So, my suggestion is that those who haven't obtained a CET 6 certificate, or those who think that their English level hasn't reached CET 6, should not consider becoming an official student of this course. Poplar Fruit said sincerely. Poplar Fruit looked at the depressed expression of many girls. He smiled and said, all right, why are you all so depressed? Didn't I say it before? If you don't have confidence in your own ability and are worried about affecting your results, that's fine. As long as you are still interested, I welcome you all to come and listen at any time. Obviously, these words couldn't arouse everyone's interest. The series of blows just now made the atmosphere drop to the freezing point. Poplar Fruit shrugged his shoulders and returned to the topic. In everyone's eyes, what kind of profession is a translator? Poplar Fruit threw the chalk in his hand into the chalk box. He took the microphone and walked to the front. He leaned on the podium and asked everyone in a cool manner. With his appearance, Poplar Fruit saved a bit of the situation. A girl timidly raised her hand. Translator is a profession that deals with words and different languages. Poplar Fruit nodded. The girl stood up and said, that's right and wrong. Poplar Fruit said with a smile, translation is the translation of words, different from interpretation. But in essence, translators are also a bridge for language communication. If it's far-reaching, then we can proudly say that we are the contractors for the transmission of Chinese culture and foreign culture. Without the efforts of translators, we wouldn't be able to see Harry Potter in China, we wouldn't be able to understand Inception in the cinema, and we wouldn't be able to watch Korean dramas and blockbuster cartoons on the computer. Poplar Fruit said affirmatively, it can be said that everyone can enjoy such a diverse and wonderful life, and it can't be separated from the contributions of translators. Poplar Fruit's impassioned speech also received a lot of applause. Poplar Fruit suddenly laughed and said, however, from a more realistic point of view, translation is still a very profitable profession. The reaction of the students in the audience was different. Some were stunned, and some couldn't help but laugh. In the past, everyone has heard that interpretation can make money, but you haven't heard that translation can make money, right? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. Yes. Many people answered in unison. A year after I graduated, because my daughter was suddenly born, I had to resign from the foreign trade company to take care of her. Poplar Fruit suddenly talked about his own story. Everyone was a bit confused. At that time, it could be said that I was out of ammunition and food, and was almost at the end of the road. Poplar Fruit didn't have a heavy heart. Instead, he said in a relaxed manner, suddenly, I had an opportunity. I entered the translation industry, and in less than a week, I became a gold medal translator. Then, I earned my first bucket of gold after I resigned. Just by taking care of my daughter, I earned more than 100,000 a month through translation, Poplar Fruit said casually, and this was money that I couldn't earn in a year when I was working. The students in the audience applauded one after another. They looked at Poplar Fruit with enthusiastic eyes, as if they were looking at an inspirational legend. And this was not the end. Poplar Fruit talked about New Translation Road Publishing House again, describing the changes made by New Translation Road as an industry changer. Poplar Fruit showed the results of the translators he trained at New Translation Road Publishing House. I won't talk about me. Because I translated teacher Mo Yang's book, my sales and dividends are much higher than most people. But these translators. Poplar Fruit pointed to some data on the PowerPoint and said, after less than 3 months of training, 2 of their translations were approved by our publishing house, and then they began to sell abroad. In the past half month, their highest sales volume was 700 copies. Of course, the growth rate of this number is still increasing, Poplar Fruit said, but in the past half month, this translator has earned nearly 2,700 yuan. Not much. Is that right? Poplar Fruit said with a smile, what if I tell you that after a year, this book will bring him at least 2,000 yuan in dividends? Yes. At the beginning, the translator's income was lower than that of a successful person with a monthly salary of 10 or 20,000 yuan. But after a few years and a few more gold mines, he would be able to sit back and enjoy a good life. Let's not talk about anything else. Just look at the best-selling authors. Ms. Rowling had published a few Harry Potter books, and it was enough for her to eat for several lifetimes. It was like playing a game where gold coins fell from the sky. Poplar Fruit's introduction made many students breathe heavily. They were immersed in the world outlined by Poplar Fruit, and the atmosphere became more and more heated. The reform we have made in this industry is to let translators participate in the division of benefits, and distribute according to their work. As long as you are outstanding, you can earn more, Poplar Fruit said, waving his hand. And this time, the class will start from the shallow to the deep, bringing students who are interested in the translation industry into the door. It will be based on practice, and theory will be supplemented. It will allow everyone to gain a deeper understanding of translation through actual combat, and then earn a little money. Poplar Fruit waved his hand and said, you heard me right. You can indeed earn money by attending this class. I can't guarantee how much you will earn, but maybe you can earn some pocket money to buy small gifts for your family and loved ones. Ha ha. Poplar Fruit did not say it humorously, but under such circumstances, the students below the stage could not help but clap and laugh. It was difficult to evaluate Poplar Fruit's class. The previous blow had made the atmosphere drop to the freezing point, and now, Poplar Fruit had used many inspiring examples and bright prospects to stir up the atmosphere again. It was like a song of ice and fire. Chapter 938. Song Jiwen and Chen Anlan came downstairs and saw Poplar Fruit's car parked there. He went over and opened the car door for Chen Anlan to get in first. Then, he went around to the other side and sat in the passenger seat. Today, Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei were going to take a look at the house again to confirm the final renovation plan. Song Jiwen heard it and wanted to go too, so Poplar Fruit came to Wenlan Martial Arts School to pick them up. Look at you, it's time to get off work now and not bring Enlan home to rest. Why are you joining in the fun? Poplar Fruit glanced at the rearview mirror and looked at the tired Chen Anlan. He said to Song Jiwen, that's right, Sister Enlan is working hard. Fong Beibei was in the back seat. She reached out and held Chen Anlan's hand and said, don't you get to rest at noon? They won't come at noon, right? Kiki looked up at Sister Enlan. She also sensibly opened her arms and hugged Sister Enlan and Sister Beibei's hands, as if she wanted to use her own arms to get rid of the hard work for her sister. How could it not be hard? Wenlan Martial Arts School only opened this week. In order to make her martial arts school popular, she didn't return to Jin City for the Spring Festival and stayed in Yang City to make preparations alone. Although Song Jiwen helped a lot, he still had to go back to his hometown for the Spring Festival. After opening, business was indeed good. On one hand, it benefited from her and Song Jiwen's frequent square dancing and exercise with the uncles and aunties in the nearby community, building a solid foundation for the masses. On the other hand, it also benefited from a short Tai Chi duel video that she and Poplar Fruit filmed together. One had to know that at first, this video was only circulated on WeChat, but later on, it went on the internet's trending list. This video was not worth mentioning in terms of kung fu. The two of them even gave up on real kung fu for the sake of viewing. Instead, they used some fancy performance moves. However, just like those action movies, People liked this kind of cool feeling. The video became popular because of poplar fruit, and Chen Anlan's valiant appearance in the video was also infatuated with many otakus. With a broad base and a high reputation among the youths, Wen Lan Martial Arts School opened by Chen Anlan naturally became popular. The first batch of 3 classes of different ages were all full. This was what Chen Anlan wanted. In the past, the dojo had always been low-key and relied on word of mouth. But now, her philosophy was to strengthen the publicity through various social networks. She was doing things in a high-profile manner, and now, she had achieved very good result. However, it seemed that the Wen Lan Martial Arts School was having a hard time with only one person supporting it. Chen Anlan's body wasn't made of iron like Yang Guo's. She had to train 3 classes of children by herself. Even though she had practiced martial arts since she was young, she still couldn't take it. It's nothing. Chen Anlan smiled. I can rest at noon, but there are still a lot of chores to do, so I can't sleep at noon. You'd better call a few seniors and juniors to help. You'll be exhausted sooner or later. Song Jiwen glanced at Chen Anlan and snorted. No way. When I left, I said that I would only go back after I proved myself. Chen Anlan said angrily. I don't want to borrow other people's strength. Then would it kill you to take 1 or 2 less classes? Song Jiwen quarreled with her again. You said it was an experiment. Why did you make it so extreme? Even if you're not tired, I'm tired. Chen Anlan frowned and snorted unhappily. She said, if you're tired, then don't come. I didn't force you to help me. Fong Beibei pulled Chen Anlan from behind. She was very anxious when she saw the 2 of them arguing. You didn't force me to come. Didn't you say that half of the name Wen Lan Martial Arts School was mine? Why would I shamelessly help you every day after work? Song Jiwen waved away Poplar Fruit's right hand and said angrily, have you ever thought about how much you can bear? I recruited 3 classes just to make more money and improve the performance of the martial arts school to prove that I'm right? Chen Anlan said unhappily. It's fine if you don't want to help, but why are you always complaining? The 2 of them didn't stop arguing even when they reached Poplar Fruit's house. I'm in that building over there. Song Jiwen pointed at another building that was still under construction less than 30 meters away. He said with a smile, although it's not as amazing as your duplex, it's still not bad. It's more than 160 square meters. In order to buy a house, you took a loan and made yourself look like a pauper. Why? Chen Anlan and he couldn't help but have the same personality. They were obviously words of concern, but they made people angry. Okay, don't quarrel. Poplar Fruit clasped Song Jiwen's neck and stood between the 2 of them. He said with a smile, today, give me face. Let's get a new house. And, don't quarrel in front of Kiki. Fong Beibei followed behind with a smile while holding Kiki. The little girl also nodded vigorously in agreement. Taking the elevator to the mountainous area, Song Jiwen stepped in first and shouted, big, one word, big. Old Guo, your first floor is almost as big as mine. Poplar Fruit smiled but didn't say anything. Fong Beibei put down Kiki and held her hand with one hand. With the other hand, she pulled Chen Anlan, who was quarreling with Song Jiwen, to visit each room. After visiting for a while, Song Jiwen came to the balcony and enjoyed the night view with Poplar Fruit in the cold wind. He couldn't help but sigh, your place is good. If it wasn't too expensive, I would also want to buy a room like yours. This balcony can be used to play a table of mahjong. I lent you money, but you refuse. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. It's okay. Take it slow. After a few days, when we have enough money, we'll sell that one and get a better one. Song Jiwen combed his hair and said with a smile. He was very clear when it came to money. I heard that you started classes today. Song Jiwen nudged Poplar Fruit with his elbow and said with a smile, how is it? Are there a lot of junior sisters around you? And the course selection system is going to be overcrowded? Poplar Fruit shook his head with a smile and said, it used to be, but after today, it's not necessarily the case. Why? Song Jiwen asked doubtfully. Because I scared them in the first class. They said that if they chose my class and didn't study hard, I would mercilessly let them fail. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. He neglected the fact that he reignited everyone's passion for translation during the second class. "You're really a beast." Song Jiwen laughed and punched Poplar Fruit. The two of them went in. Fong Beibei and Chen Anlan were coming down. Because Kiki needed to be supported to walk down the stairs, Fong Beibei continued to talk to Chen Anlan. There are a total of 6 rooms. 2 rooms below and 4 above. The one above is the bedroom, and the one below is the biggest one. Uncle said that he would leave it for him to use as a gym or practice room. Then there's the study room. Kiki also has her own room. Kiki gasped for breath. Halfway down the stairs, she stood still and said, "Kiki's room, there's Pleasant Goat, there's Big Wolf." Listening to her talk, it was really endless. But the little girl's childish voice still made Poplar Fruit and the others laugh. Chapter 939. During the basic Swedish class, although the strict Poplar Fruit once again scared a lot of students, there were still a lot of people who signed up for his class. Many true fans quit the system and changed from official students to unofficial auditing students. A lot of empty seats were left, and more students who were really interested in English joined in. In less than a day, the course selection system was full again. However, at the beginning of the second week, the course selection system was closed, and no one could choose again. Regardless of whether they had chosen a class or not, they all focused on listening to the class and learning. This was just like what Poplar Fruit had said to them. Whether they chose a class or not was just a matter of credits. As long as they were willing to learn, they could also learn knowledge by auditing. As for Poplar Fruit, he did not discriminate. Any student who came to the class could participate and receive the same guidance as Poplar Fruit. During the second and third weeks, Poplar Fruit's classes were still full. Even if it was a Swedish class that no one knew, the students still flocked to it. This was because Poplar Fruit's class was too interesting. He did not start with the boring pronunciation of the phonetic symbols. Instead, he picked out a few typical sentences and let the students familiarize themselves with the pronunciation rules that they had never tried before. This also allowed many students to proudly say to their friends in Swedish after the second week of class, "Hey, beautiful, do you want to meet me tonight? Or I think your nose is like an elephant." On the internet, Yang Guo's current image was that of a has-been celebrity. After all, it had been too long since he had anything new to talk about. Moreover, he didn't appear on TV as often as other celebrities, so naturally, everyone's pursuit of him had gradually faded. Only the true fans of Poplar Fruit and Kiki continued to follow Poplar Fruit's Weibo, and the interesting life of the father and daughter became a great joy in their lives. Some students used their mobile phones to post videos of Poplar Fruit's classes on the internet. There was no expected popularity, and this could be explained very well. Of course, Poplar Fruit didn't care about this. This was because he was teaching and imparting knowledge, not seeking fame and fortune. It was enough for him to have people enter the field of translation and linguistics under his guidance. There weren't many people who really paid attention to these videos with terrible quality and noisy sound. They were only a few people who followed in Poplar Fruit's footsteps academically. For example, Professor Rowling and the 2 graduate students he brought along to do research with Poplar Fruit. There were also undergraduate students, but they could not keep up with the research progress of Poplar Fruit. Originally, Professor Luo Lin didn't care. However, after he watched Poplar Fruit's translation theory and practice video online, he ordered his students to attend Poplar Fruit's class and learn from Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit's lecture on translation theory was not very profound. With the foundation of Beijing International Studies University, even undergraduates who had not been involved in the relevant courses had read books to understand it. But Professor Luo Lin laughed and pointed out what he valued about Poplar Fruit. What is truly priceless is his experience. You might not know Poplar Fruit well, but I can tell you that in terms of translation experience, no one in China can compare to Poplar Fruit. Professor Luo Lin said, "I can't, neither can Dean Qi Shan." This had nothing to do with the number of translations, although the total number of words translated by Poplar Fruit was not a small number. The reason why Poplar Fruit was so far ahead of all the translators in China was because of his diverse translation experience. Other people would at most be an English translator and a translator for a small number of languages, but Yang Guo had translated for more than 10 languages. Not only that, if you counted the number of translations between these 10 languages, the number of translations would be terrifying. Putting aside the school matters for now, Poplar Fruit had other things to do. He had asked Song Jiwen to find a renovation team to renovate the house, but the careless Poplar Fruit did not take it to heart. On the other hand, Fong Beibei, other than going to class, was running over to the new house to supervise the renovation process. Of course, Poplar Fruit was not idle either. He had more things to do than Fong Beibei. Fat Dragon and Cai Simin had both come to Yangcheng. They had recruited more than 20 employees. While purchasing, they also transported the purchased equipment to Guishan Province's Lidong County. The Department of Education had arranged a warehouse there, and a few youths from Xiong Village were helping to guard it. Poplar Fruit's original plan was to personally bring Fat Dragon and Cai Simin to Lidong County, but the plan could not keep up with the changes. Poplar Fruit had no choice but to let Fat Dragon and Cai Simin take charge of the installation of the long-distance education equipment. He followed Zhang Yujie and boarded the plane to Canada. This was really sudden because it was already the end of February. Yang Guo was going to attend a conference in Macau next month. If she didn't handle things properly in Canada, it would become a tug of war. Yang Guo would be in big trouble. Going to Canada was mainly a problem left over from last year. Poplar Fruit met Alice Munro and had the idea of introducing her books into China. However, at that time, Zhang Yujie was still at Dongshin Publishing, and Pang Yu was busy promoting books. He could only put the plan on hold. Before the Spring Festival, Poplar Fruit contacted Alice Munro, but the old lady did not immediately agree to Poplar Fruit. 2 days ago, she suddenly summoned Poplar Fruit to Canada to talk to her face-to-face. Why was that? Poplar Fruit got the answer before he boarded the plane. The person who called Poplar Fruit was Professor Anderson of the Nobel Prize in Literature, who came to China to look for Professor Mo Yang. It turned out that Munro was also on the list of nominees for the Nobel Prize this year. She knew Professor Anderson, so she got a recommendation for Poplar Fruit from him. She wanted Poplar Fruit to translate her books into Swedish. Actually, it did not mean that Poplar Fruit's translations would win the prize. Professor Anderson just thought that Poplar Fruit's translations would make them feel more comfortable. After learning that Poplar Fruit was the translator of last year's Nobel Prize in Literature winner Mo Yang, Munro was even more tempted. It was not impossible to give her works to Poplar Fruit. So that's how it is. Grandma Munro has a lot of ideas. Poplar Fruit was a little depressed. However, Zheng Yujie was not angry. She comforted Poplar Fruit, telling him that it was normal. In business, there was no such thing as friendship. Besides, Poplar Fruit and Grandma Munro had only met once. On the plane, Yang Guo didn't use the boring few hours to sleep. He took advantage of this time to quickly search his memory for the Monroe grandmother's masterpiece, Escape, and then began to translate it into Swedish. Escape was only a short story, so it did not take Poplar Fruit a long time. However, to be able to take out this translation during the negotiation showed Poplar Fruit's sincerity. Didn't success come from the accumulation of little details? Chapter 940. On the plane, because Poplar Fruit either had his eyes closed or was typing on the computer, Zheng Yujie just looked at him from the side and then slowly fell asleep. They didn't say much until they got off the plane. Seeing that Poplar Fruit called Fong Beibei to report his safety as soon as he got off the plane, Zheng Yujie snorted unhappily. "What's the matter?" Her voice was so loud that Poplar Fruit certainly heard it. He put away his phone and looked up at her with amusement. "Let's see you slowly become a henpecked husband." Zheng Yujie was not afraid of him. She raised her head and said proudly with disdain, "Isn't it just a business trip? Do you need to call me all the time to report?" Poplar Fruit was too lazy to argue with her about the difference between reporting and reporting safety. He smiled and said, "Okay, stop it. You're not a dawdler. Let's go quickly. The sooner we finish our business, the sooner we can go back. Didn't I tell you that I have a seminar in Macau? If I miss it, My teacher will cut me. Zhang Yujie snorted coldly and wrapped her windbreaker tightly around her. With a quick movement of her hand, she crossed the belt around her waist and walked out of the airport in a hurry. Poplar Fruit shook his head and dragged their suitcases, following behind like a bodyguard. Ontario was considered to be in the south of Canada, but now it was still snowing and the cold wind was whistling. Why is it so cold? Zhang Yujie and Poplar Fruit both set off from Yangcheng, which was not cold at the moment, so they didn't wear thick clothes, especially Zhang Yujie. She was wearing a thin long-sleeved shirt under her windbreaker. In the snowy Ottawa, she suddenly froze into an ice beauty. She stood on the side of the road and waited for a taxi. The cold air went straight to her neck and she was so cold that she stamped her feet. Suddenly, something warm wrapped around her from behind. Zhang Yujie turned her head and saw that Poplar Fruit had taken off his leather jacket and put it on her. Are you crazy? Zhang Yujie was stunned for a moment, then she pushed Poplar Fruit and grabbed the leather jacket that had slipped off and asked angrily. At this time, Poplar Fruit only had a short-sleeved shirt left on his body, and his strong and well-shaped muscles appeared on his arms. Although Poplar Fruit looked more handsome like this, now was not the time to act cool. Yang Guo pressed down Zhang Yujie's hand that was about to push the clothes back. She smiled and asked, "What are you doing? Aren't you cold? Hurry up and put it on. Be good." Yang Guo's tone carried a gentle reprimand that was reserved for Fang Bei. Are you trying to be a hero by putting it on me? Aren't you cold? Zhang Yujie did not fall for his trick. She said angrily, "You're wearing a short-sleeved shirt in winter. If you catch a cold tonight, how are we going to meet the client tomorrow?" I'm really not cold. Poplar Fruit smiled. When the cold wind blew, it could only make the corner of his clothes flutter. Poplar Fruit stood tall and said without trembling, "Have you forgotten? I'm a kung fu man." Under Poplar Fruit's tug, Zhang Yujie helplessly put on Poplar Fruit's leather jacket. Although it was not as good as a down jacket, it was much warmer than before. However, her expression was still angry, as if she was still at odds with Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit did not understand. Soon, the taxi arrived. Zhang Yujie helped Poplar Fruit to put the suitcase in the back of the car. She followed Poplar Fruit into the taxi, but turned her head and looked out of the window. Poplar Fruit did not care about her. After he told the driver the address, he began to chat with the driver. One of them was a local native uncle who could talk about all kinds of trivial things in the streets, while the other was an extremely intelligent and knowledgeable weirdo. Not only could he pick up on any topic, but he could also talk about the local customs of Canada and even Ottawa. I saw many stalls on the street with colorful flags. Is it because the Maple Leaf Festival is coming? Poplar Fruit asked with interest. It's still early. The Maple Leaf Festival is next month. You came at a bad time. The driver laughed. But it doesn't matter. As you can see, you can buy maple candy products all year round. The colorful flags of the stalls are for tourists like you, so you don't have to care about the festival. As long as you're happy, every day is a festival. That's a very philosophical sentence. Poplar Fruit smiled and gave him a thumbs up. The driver saw it from the rearview mirror and laughed. By the way, can I ask, where can I buy a different birthday present in Ottawa? It can be a surprise present for the girl I like. Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. The driver looked at Zhang Yujie strangely in the rearview mirror. He thought that Zhang Yujie did not understand English, but that did not stop him from introducing the place to Poplar Fruit. The driver introduced a few places, but the one he recommended the most was Fulton's Pancake House. You're lucky. This week, their maple candy production studio is only open to the public. Take note, they're only open until the end of April. The driver laughed. You can buy it or learn how to make it yourself. Poplar Fruit asked the driver to point out the location on the map on his phone. He smiled and hugged him before paying the driver and getting out of the car. He definitely couldn't go there today. It had taken him more than an hour to get here from the airport, and it was already 2 in the afternoon. If he took another transport to the small town where the Menlo granny lived, it would definitely be night by then. So, Poplar Fruit and Zhang Yujie followed the plan and checked into the hotel they had booked online. Of course, there were 2 rooms. At the door, Poplar Fruit handed the suitcase to Zhang Yujie and said with a smile, Here, I'll stay across from you. If you need anything, just come and find me. Got it? So long-winded. Zheng Yujie lazily raised her eyes and looked at Poplar Fruit. She slapped the Poplar Fruit's leather jacket that was hanging on her elbow on Poplar Fruit's chest, pulled the suitcase, and opened the door to enter. This attitude really made people angry and helpless. Poplar Fruit watched her go in and shook his head with a smile. He opened the door and went back to his room. Sitting on the bed, Poplar Fruit sent a message to Fong Beibei on WeChat. I've already checked into the hotel. I'll go out and buy you a gift later, haha. Ding dong. His WeChat immediately rang. Fong Beibei actually replied. She asked, wow, what gift? But, uncle, let me tell you. You have to be careful when buying a gift. I don't want a gift that only costs money, hee hee. Fong Beibei was still very naughty. Poplar Fruit's mouth hung a smile. He stopped sending WeChat messages and directly called, hey, why aren't you sleeping? You're naughty, I spanked your butt. I'm waiting for your news. Fong Beibei yawned, but still giggled and said coquettishly, how am I naughty? You're obviously naughty. Poplar Fruit laughed and said, go to sleep. When you wake up, call me. Okay, Fong Beibei promised sweetly. Now that she was at ease, she could indeed sleep. Chapter 941. I'm going out later. After having lunch with Zheng Yujie at a Western restaurant near the hotel, Poplar Fruit picked up a napkin to wipe his mouth and said, I know. Zheng Yujie looked up at Poplar Fruit and turned her head to the side. It's not like I don't understand English. Poplar Fruit scratched his head and said, then are you going to wait for me at the hotel? Or are you going out on your own? Why can't I go with you? Zheng Yujie turned her face. Her eyes were a little red as she questioned. No, I thought you wouldn't want to. Poplar Fruit raised his hand and said with cold sweat, since you want to go, then let's go together. You keep saying I thought. Zheng Yujie's emotions were faintly out of control, but she controlled it very well. She took 2 deep breaths and said with a muffled nose, why didn't you ask if I was willing? Zheng Yujie was obviously referring to the fact that after she came to Yangcheng, Poplar Fruit had been avoiding her. Other than the 1 or 2 times they needed to meet for work, he rarely took the initiative to contact her. Zheng Yujie felt wronged. She thought sadly, I was willing to see the 2 of you go out together and come to Yangcheng to wait for an almost impossible hope, but you still treat me like this. Do you think I'll feel awkward and do something to your girlfriend? Unable to argue with Zheng Yujie, Poplar Fruit could only remain silent. The 2 got into the car and drove to the Fulton Pancake House that the driver mentioned. At the Fulton Pancake House, Poplar Fruit bought some maple syrup and candy. He also learned from Zheng Yujie to make some maple pancakes and cookies. Zheng Yujie's hands-on skills were the worst. In the end, she just stood aside and watched. She randomly ordered Poplar Fruit and secretly ate the pancakes in the plastic box. At this time, Zheng Yujie's mood improved a little. She even sighed and said that time passed too quickly. The Fulton Pancake House didn't only sell pancakes, and the street didn't only sell pancakes and maple syrup products. Due to the large number of tourists visiting, the smart businessman quickly discovered another business opportunity: handicrafts and specialty product. After all, maple syrup products were mostly food. It was fine as a gift, but it was far from enough as a souvenir for one's own trip. Therefore, the Crystal Maple Leaf Gift House that Poplar Fruit walked into sold handicrafts that were compatible with Canadian culture. Miniature sculpture? Yang Guo asked in surprise. Yes, miniature sculptures. The shop owner said with a smile, of course, it won't be too small. You can see it clearly with a magnifying glass. You can engrave the words you want to express on it. You have to know that maple leaves represent eternal love. The blessings and words of love you engrave on it will be warm forever. It does sound good. Poplar Fruit scratched his head and laughed. But I want to engrave it in Chinese. Can you engrave it in Chinese? No problem at all. The shop owner smiled and said, we are all laser engraving now. The whole process is controlled by a computer. You can type what you want to say yourself, and then you can choose the font you like. We have more than 100 artistic fonts in Chinese specially installed here for Chinese tourists. Heavens, he really took care of everything. Poplar Fruit was convinced. He decided to make a gift for Feng Beibei there. What did he say? Zheng Yujie didn't understand some of the technical terms. After Poplar Fruit stopped, she asked curiously. He said that he can make a crystal maple leaf and then engrave what I want to say on it. Poplar Fruit smiled with satisfaction. I plan to make a birthday gift for Beibei here. Too happy, Poplar Fruit forgot about Zheng Yujie's feelings. While Poplar Fruit sat in front of the computer, typing, choosing fonts, and standing up to wait for the finished product, Zheng Yujie sat silently at the side, watching the man busy for another woman. She had mixed feelings, but more than that, she felt wronged and sad. Half an hour later, Poplar Fruit walked out of the crystal maple leaf gift house with Zheng Yujie with a red gift bag. He turned his head and asked, "Oh, right, why didn't you buy some souvenirs? This crystal maple leaf is pretty good. I highly recommend it. As a gift. Cough, it's also okay to give it to your family. Forget it, I'm not in the mood." Zheng Yujie shook her head. Her first sentence was a little dispirited, but after that, she changed to her previous swift and decisive attitude. "Are you done? If you're done, let's go back to the hotel and discuss how to persuade Menlo tomorrow." "Done," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. He quite liked Zheng Yujie's point. She could pick up and let go. Even if she was in a bad mood, she could quickly adjust and wouldn't cause trouble for the people around her. However, Poplar Fruit obviously overestimated Zheng Yujie's ability to adjust herself, or he underestimated the depth of Zheng Yujie's feelings for him. Zheng Yujie waited until they returned to the hotel. She followed Poplar Fruit into his room and then asked in a low voice, at that time, "Why did you choose her?" Poplar Fruit's body stiffened and turned around. "You don't have to tell me that you two have been together for a long time." Zheng Yujie looked at Poplar Fruit with burning eyes. She didn't avoid it, she gently gritted her teeth and said, "I know, when I confessed to you, you were still single. At that time, I knew in my heart that the one I liked was her." Poplar Fruit was silent for a long time before he sighed and said, "I don't know either. Maybe I fell in love with her the first time I saw her. If you met me first, would you still choose her?" Zhang Yujie raised her hand, wiped the corner of her eyes, and asked. Poplar Fruit did know Feng Beibei first, but in terms of familiarity, when Poplar Fruit and Zhang Yujie became good friends, Feng Beibei and Poplar Fruit were still strangers who had only met once. Poplar Fruit was silent for a while before he said, "Maybe." He didn't say it in detail. With Poplar Fruit's character, if he was only friends with Zhang Yujie, then he would still choose Feng Beibei. But if he was already together with Zhang Yujie before he met Feng Beibei, then Feng Beibei wouldn't be a choice. What if she wasn't there? Zhang Yujie was so weak in front of Poplar Fruit for the first time. She asked with tears in her eyes, "Would you accept me?" Poplar Fruit was silent. There was actually an answer to this question. If Feng Beibei had never appeared in his life, then he would have chosen Zhang Yujie. Because, to be honest, Poplar Fruit had been moved by Zhang Yujie's infatuation more than once. But, there aren't so many IFS in life. Poplar Fruit didn't want to say the answer. He looked away from Zhang Yujie's face, sighed, and said, "Yujie, you're a good girl. You should know." Zhang Yujie interrupted Poplar Fruit. She wiped her tears and widened her beautiful eyes to stop herself from crying. She said firmly, "Don't try to persuade me. I won't give up." She turned and left the room. After the door closed, Poplar Fruit stared blankly at Zhang Yujie's back. After a long time, he held his head with both hands and sighed to the sky. "Why do you have to do this? Why do you have to do this?" You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.